Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is time for reflection, and our time for reflection leader today is Lorraine Curry, the Chief Executive, Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund.
Presiding Officer, members of the Scottish Parliament, thank you so much for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. For many of us, the story of the Good Samaritan is one of the most memorable parables in the Gospels. When a traveller was beaten, robbed and left by the roadside, he waited a long time for anyone to help. Many saw him but hurried past, unwilling to interrupt their journey. He suffered alone. Yet the Good Samaritan chose differently. Instead of walking by, the Good Samaritan drew close, cared for his wounds, lifted the stranger onto his own animal, and stayed with him throughout the night. The Samaritan teaches us that true love is practical. It is a time freely given and plans set aside. It is not enough to look and feel pity. Love requires that we stop, draw close, and act. Charity, compassion, love and solidarity are all different faces of the same eternal spirit that moves us to action. 60 years ago this year, this same spirit gave birth to Sciaff's practical action in our Rutherglen school. For the past 60 years, Sciaff has lifted millions of people out of poverty, people of all faiths and people of none. It has provided life-saving aid to people, such as those in Gaza, and campaigned to change the systems that keep people poor. The incredible generosity of people in Scotland through Sciaff and our local partners stands today as a beacon of hope that a better world is possible. A reminder to everyone, including our leaders, that it is compassion, charity, love and solidarity which still define our humanity. The lesson of the Good Samaritan is also a call to leaders to act with courage and compassion, even when the politics of division and selfishness try to consume us. Our world faces many trials: climate change, conflict, hunger, the crisis of global debt, and deepening division at home and abroad. Yet these challenges cannot be met with further division and conflict. The Good Samaritan reminds us that everyone is our neighbour. When a society grows used to ignoring the poorest abroad, it soon risks turning its back on the most vulnerable at home. Showing love for others enriches everyone. Disregard for others diminishes all of us. We are all part of one human family, interlinked to each other's lives and destinies. My hope for this chamber and for all of us is that we take the Good Samaritan's path. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Before we move to topical questions, I'd like to say something about the deeply shocking situation the Parliament has faced in recent days. Not a single person in Parliament is unaffected. And you'll be aware that the corporate body met this morning, and following that meeting, a detailed note has been provided to party groups, to individual members and to staff. And I just wish to take this opportunity to reiterate a number of points to the Chamber. I'm absolutely appalled that anyone would have to face a situation like this in Parliament, or indeed in any workplace or in any other environment. We all feel shock and hurt at the recent allegations relating to an elected member and reports of a shocking invasion of privacy. The safety and welfare of everyone who works in this building is our priority. These circumstances are unprecedented for this Parliament, and it has been and continues to be a highly complex situation to navigate. There is an ongoing live criminal investigation. The information available to the Parliament at different stages has therefore necessarily been limited, and parliamentary authorities do not have confirmation of any investigation details. And if further information is confirmed or verified, we will share this. It's important to be clear that neither officials nor the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body have the authority to remove the rights and privileges of an elected member. Officials have worked at pace to consider how this unprecedented situation should best be responded to, establishing appropriate lawful authority to act and carrying out a thorough risk assessment. And having considered this, the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body agreed to deactivate the Members' Pass. And while procedures are a matter for the whole Parliament, for its part, the SPCB is committed to reviewing online and physical security as a whole in line with its remit and responsibilities. And as this remains a live criminal investigation, the matter is sub judice. We must avoid contempt of court, and nothing should be said or done that might jeopardise the investigation. We can only comment on information that is verified, and I will continue to keep party leaders and groups across the Parliament up to date. Police Scotland has swept the facilities in the building and no devices were found. Enhanced security checks off the building will also continue as we seek to provide further reassurance to you and to each and every person who works or visits the Scottish Parliament. Teams at the Parliament have also been working hard to put in place a range of additional support for all those affected. And the Chief Executive and I wrote to building users yesterday to set out how this support can be accessed. Meetings have taken place with various groups already, and we will be continuing that process across the coming weeks, working with all staff groups in this building. I would encourage everyone to access the support they need. This is vitally important, and I would reiterate that you should feel able to contact me personally in confidence if I can be of any help. I realise that people have questions about these matters, and the SPCB and I have set out as much information as we can in the update to you earlier today. And finally, I must remind members that as this matter is sub judice, it would not be appropriate to comment further. And I assure members that I will continue to keep them updated. I am acutely aware of the concerns people have, and we are committed to doing everything we can to address them. Thank you. We will now move on to topical questions. My apologies, if you would just excuse me a second. Before we move to topical questions, we'll look at the revised business motion. So it's consideration of business motion 18622, in the name of Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, on changes to the business programme. And any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 18622 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And we shall now move to topical questions. And at question number 1, I call Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking in response to the overall increase in recorded crimes in the past year, including rape, violent crime, antisocial behaviour and shoplifting.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, Scotland continues to be a safe place to live, with recorded crime fallen by more than half since 1991. However, I am very concerned at those areas that have seen increases, particularly in sexual violence and domestic abuse. And whilst I welcome that some of this increase will be due to an increase in reporting and trust in the justice system, it is abhorrent that such crimes, which are mainly against women, are taking place. That is why, through the Equally Safe strategy, we are aiming to tackle and prevent such violence. And this year, we are investing £4.2 billion across the justice system, including a record £1.64 billion for policing.
Liam Kerr.
Well, the data actually shows that in the year to June 2025, violent crime is up, sexual crime is up, antisocial behaviour is up, shoplifting is up. The President of ASPS said, how bad does it have to get before we actually see some meaningful and credible steps to ensure policing is able to deal with these things? What's needed is actually a real, credible response. So has the Cabinet Secretary got a meaningful and credible response she can provide, or will she continue to hide behind decades-old statistics?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I thank Mr Kerr for his question, and of course it remains imperative that we acknowledge that Scotland remains a safer place, certainly under this government. But where we are seeing changes in the types of offences, it is imperative that we respond to that. So if we take, for example, crimes of dishonesty, housebreaking has fallen, but shoplifting has increased significantly. And that's why, for example, we are investing £3 million into retail crime, which is seeing positive outcomes from that investment. But over and above our record investment for policing, there is investment that is going into the violence prevention framework and the work of delivering Equally Safe to tackle the abhorrent crimes against women, which is in essence about prevention, providing support to victims, and also changing the behaviour of men in terms of those underlying behaviours and attitudes.
Liam Kerr.
Well, it is important that the government responds, and antisocial behaviour is up by 5%. Offensive weapons use is up 13%. Now, in late July, I asked the Victims Minister what actions have been implemented following the Youth Violence Summit that the government insisted was not yet another talking shop. The Minister could not name a single action, not one. Can the Cabinet Secretary help the Victims Minister and tell us if any new actions from that summit have now been implemented, and if so, when will they result in these figures finally starting to fall?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, of course, any level of violence amongst young people, or indeed any citizen, is concerning. It is imperative that as a government we continue to invest on early intervention, and prevention is of course key. And following the summit, I advised media and indeed the Parliament that the cash back to communities funding for the next phase was or is increasing from £20 million to £26 million, and one of the actions, additional actions being taken forward following the summit is the delivery of violence and weapon prevention education roadshows in targeted areas where levels of violence are high. And it is also crucial as an action that we we listen to the voices of young people, and that is young people who are law-abiding, who are seeking to get on with their life and attend school. But we also have to reach out to those in our communities that have become marginalised. So the voices of young people are particularly important in all of this, as is the work across government, not least the investment in education, which of course has seen excellent exam results just published over the summer.
I'm obviously keen to take supplementaries. If we can all be concise, that would be helpful. And I call Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The vast number of charges under the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act are being prosecuted, with over 90% proceeding to court. Does the Cabinet Secretary believe that changes like this in our laws and our culture will empower women to speak out and have the confidence to go to the police, court and support services?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, an important part of the Equally Safe strategy is to continue our work to empower victims to come forward to report crimes. It is essential where a crime has occurred that people have the confidence and the support to come forward. What we are seeing with the Domestic Abuse 2019 Act, which is often described as gold standard legislation, it's described as world-leading legislation, is that crimes under that piece of legislation has increased by 26%. But of course, we can't just stop with our legislation on domestic abuse. It is important that we bring forward other measures, and that is what we're doing in the remainder of this term. And in only a few weeks' time, we will be debating the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill, which is about implementing a trauma-informed justice system and supporting victims of sexual violence with, I hope, the implementation of the new Sexual Offences Court.
Ash Regan.
Presiding Officer, given the crimes linked to prostitution are rising, a crime that's obviously rooted in exploitation and violence, does the Cabinet Secretary accept that Scotland's current laws are failing to protect those that are exploited by the global sex trade? And will the Government work with me in supporting my unbuyable bill to make the purchase of sex illegal in all circumstances, so we send a very clear message that sex is not for sale in Scotland and the burden of criminality lies with the exploiters and not the exploited?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I very much agree that criminal exploitation of women, that sexual exploitation of women, is a form of violence against women and girls, and I very much also agree that the core root of the problem is indeed the behaviour of men who think women are there to purchase as they please. Where I think Parliament will have to come to a view is what course of action will best protect women now and in the future, and what course of action will now keep women safe. And the Government, like every other parliamentary group, will look to see how Ms Regan's bill progresses in the course of parliamentary scrutiny.
Sharon Dowie.
Presiding Officer, shoplifting is up 124% in the past 4 years, and that's an underestimate, as many retailers don't bother reporting it as they don't think the shoplifter would face justice. They're right, because less than half of the shoplifting cases are actually solved in Scotland, and most of those caught rack up fines they have no intention of paying, or they get a slap in the wrist. It's clear the current system is not working, so when will the Government change course, bring in stronger punishments for repeat offenders and increase police visibility in our streets to deter thieves?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, of course our independent courts very much do take into account people who make repeat offending, and a key aspect of the Retail Crime Task Force, which the Scottish Government have supported with additional funding of £3 million, is to stop people from becoming perpetrators of acquisitive crime, bringing perpetrators to justice, with very much a focus on repeat offenders offenders and indeed organised criminals, as well as strengthening the collective protection against retail crime. And of course the Task Force Bulletin for July 2005 has reported on significant results in Edinburgh since April, with 234 charges been brought against retail crime offenders. Where the cases dealt with relate to an estimated £25,000 of stolen group, and the team's work has also led to 230 offender identifications across the city, and I'd be happy to provide more information.
Thank you. We move to question 2. Again, concise responses and questions would be very gratefully received. Jackie Baillie.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to reduce NHS waiting lists in light of new analysis reportedly showing that waits of over 2 years are now more than 800 times higher in Scotland than in England.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Presiding Officer, we're investing a record £21.7 billion in health and social care this year in a budget that Jackie Baillie refused to support. That focused investment coming from that budget is delivering tangible improvements in health and social care performance. Statistics published just this morning that I'm sure Jackie Baillie will wish to welcome show just a few examples. The number of operations performed in July 2025 are at their highest level in over 5 years. For planned care, new outpatient activity and inpatient and day case activity has increased, with inpatient day case waiting lists down compared to the last quarter. CAM's waiting time standards have been met for a third time in a row, and the lowest number of 8 and 12-hour waits in A&E for any month since September 2023, despite July attendances being the highest compared to any other July in 6 years. These are encouraging signs that efforts to improve access and efficiency are delivering results, and my thanks go to the staff for their incredible efforts.
Jackie Baillie.
So much spin from the Cabinet Secretary, he must be positively dizzy, and I'm afraid his excuses won't wash with the 14,963 people waiting over 2 years for an operation. Operations are still lower than the level that they were pre-pandemic. And despite John Swinney promising action last year, the number of people waiting in Scotland has gone up and is at a staggering 880,000 people. A record high. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us why has it gone up?
Cabinet Secretary.
I note from that question that Jackie Baillie refused to offer thanks to the staff for their efforts in improving performance over the recent quarter, or indeed to welcome the progress that has been made. But of course we are making progress. We've delivered a record number of hip and knee operations in the NHS over the last year. We continue to make improvements, as the figures from this morning demonstrate, and that's why the most recent comparable analysis we've got going back to February show that we are delivering faster levels of increased activity than the NHS in England. That's the difference that an SNP Scottish Government can make.
Jackie Baillie.
It's really interesting because I do spend most of my time listening and talking to staff, and it is an indication of how desperate the Cabinet Secretary is, that he doesn't like the message, he simply attacks the messenger. New figures yesterday show that the number of private hospital and clinic admissions in Scotland are the highest on record, something he failed to mention. Cabinet Secretary, is it not the case that the SNP's neglect of the NHS has led to a two-tier health service, is letting down staff and is continuing the failure of 880,000 patients waiting in pain?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's a bit rich for... Of course, I want to ensure that the NHS capacity in Scotland is able to deal with the demand. That's why we're delivering a record settlement for health and social care services, and we're directing targeted interventions around waiting times. But it's a bit rich for Jackie Baillie to criticise the Scottish Government for private admissions when there were 240 private admissions in Scotland per 100,000 of the population in Scotland. In England, this figure is 54% higher, with a rate of 370 admissions per 100,000. Now, Jackie Baillie has come here with the negativity. She has not supported the positive interventions that have come forward. But I've got one area of positive support that Jackie, and this is serious, one area of positive intervention that Jackie Baillie could support us with. Last year, Home Office figures show that there was a 77% reduction in health and care worker visas approved by the UK Government in the year to 2025. We know that we need international workers in health and care. Donald McCaskill has said so clearly. So perhaps Jackie Baillie could help us in recruiting the staff that we need for health and social care by convincing her government to deliver a migration system that works for the health and social care system in Scotland, rather than making it harder for us to recruit.
Sandesh Gohani.
Thank you. And a declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP, where I worked over the summer. And after nearly 2 decades of SNP mismanagement, 1 in 6 Scots is now trapped on an NHS waiting list. GP vacancy rates remain high, with continued nursing shortages. And despite promises, waiting times are spiralling, with nearly a quarter of patients waiting over a year. A shortfall of £290 million prevents practising from hiring additional staff. Patients' physical and mental well-being are being harmed. Isn't it time that this government makes significant, common-sense, bureaucratic cuts and reduces the redundant middle management of the NHS and divert those resources to the front line?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, President Officer. I know that Sandesh Gulhani will know this, that Public Health Scotland are very clear that in order to arrive at a 1 in 6 figure, you have to combine list numbers, which they recommend you do not do. And so I think you'll want to check up on that figure. In terms of GP numbers, we've just seen welcome figures showing for the first time since 2019 a rise, 4% rise in the number of whole-time equivalent GPs. I am now engaged with the Royal College of General Practitioners and the BMA around the long-term funding position, including how they can see greater recruitment of general practitioners to match the incredible investment that's going into training them. We're seeing record numbers of 1,200 GPs currently in training.
Claire Hawley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I remind Chamber that I hold a bank nurse contract with Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS. I welcome the progress the Scottish Government has made in reducing waiting lists, and it's disappointing that Labour consistently talk down our NHS and our hard-working staff. In that vein, what can the Cabinet Secretary say about the recent figures on numbers of GPs, paramedics and wider NHS workforce?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm absolutely committed to our workforce. That is the greatest asset of our health and care services, and I remain extremely grateful for the daily contribution that they make to providing high-quality services to patients across Scotland. It is welcome that data published this morning shows an increase in the NHS whole-time equivalent workforce since last year and a 16.6% increase in headcount over the last decade. Last week we saw an increase in the number of new paramedics, and our GP whole-time equivalent workforce has grown by 4% over the last year, the first such increase since 2019. So we'll continue to invest in our NHS, our incredible staff, so they can continue to deliver an NHS for the people of Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In my summer surgeries this year, one of the biggest issues was lengthy waiting times at NHS Grampian. I had an elderly constituent in Portgordon who's been told he'll have to wait 18 months for a cataract operation, and another in Hopeman who has been waiting since February 2023 for a referral to ENT and has been told the waiting time is 137 weeks. Can the Cabinet Secretary defend these lengthy waiting times? And if, as he hopefully can't, what is he doing with NHS Grampian, a board that is in dire financial straits, to get these waiting times reduced, because patients urgently need this care?
Cabinet Secretary.
Ross for his question. I know that the waits that he has outlined are not acceptable. They're not a position where we expect to be, and that's why we're making the investments that we are. In terms of, and I was able to recount the position in terms of improvements around both inpatient and day case activity and outpatient activity, as well as record numbers of hip and knee operations. In terms of the position regarding NHS Grampian, we are providing specific support for them through their escalation process of that, he will be aware, and also looking at how there can be regional support provided to bring down their waiting list, so that there is wider health service activity to support the position for his constituents that he is referencing, so that we can see them faster.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In NHS Ayrshire and Arran, more than 11,000 patients were stuck waiting more than a year for an outpatient's appointment. Cabinet Secretary, these waits have consequences for patients and from our highly professional, hard-working staff. The reworked plans you constantly set out are not working. We need some honesty from this government. So I ask you, what can you say to those thousands of patients and to the staff in Ayrshire and Arran about what action you will take to stop them waiting in limbo?
Always through the Chair, please. Cabinet Secretary.
I recognise the question from Carol Mochan, and I hope she recognises that actually the interventions we're taking are making a difference. We are seeing increases in activity that I was able to quote from statistics this morning, showing July had the highest number of operations delivered for any month going back to February 2020. That is welcome progress that has been delivered by the targeted investments of this government through the budget of £21.7 billion, and thanks to the hard-working staff in our NHS. We are rolling out greater regional working to support the delivery of faster progress on waiting times, the Golden Jubilee being a critical example, as well as our NTC and other regional hubs, and I would hope that that would help to deliver the improvements that Carol Mochan is waiting for within NHS Ardrossan.
Question number 3, Kenneth Gibson.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government, in light of the Cabinet Secretary for Transport's announcement on the 19th of February 2025, whether it will provide an update on its discussions with Peel Ports regarding bringing Ardrossan Harbour into public ownership.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
I can assure Kenny Gibson and his constituents that concluding this matter and bringing Ardrossan Harbour into public ownership is a top priority for Scottish ministers. And yesterday, I shared an update with both the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee and the Ardrossan Task Force that our asset owner, Caledonian Maritime Assets Limited, is continuing positive negotiations with Peel Ports Group. These complex and commercially sensitive discussions are now focusing on heads of terms, and both parties are committed to confirming details of the potential sale as quickly as possible. Achieving a clean title on the assets, a large part of which have not been transacted since the late 19th century, and adhering to legal and commercial due process is essential to securing a sustainable future for our ferry operations. This Government will continue to support the role of Ardrossan Harbour for the long-term benefit of local communities in Arran and Ardrossan, and I look forward to updating Parliament on further progress at the earliest opportunity.
Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I'm heartened that progress is being made and commend her tenacity in pursuing the harbour's purchase. However, progress still appears to be glacial. The communities of Ardrossan and Arran just want to know when the purchase will successfully conclude, given the time it's already elapsed. Few thought, regardless of how complex the negotiations to buy at harbour would take even 6 months that we've waited so far. So can the Cabinet Secretary say what further work is being done to ensure the purchase is concluded in days and weeks rather than months and years?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I do understand frustrations. I have and been quite clear of my determination that this will be concluded, but success will be when those negotiations succeed and are agreed by both parties. On my part, I think the move to heads of terms ensures that we're getting into what will be the practical detail of ensuring that clean title that I referred to, and that will be the long-term result of those negotiations. But in terms of that impetus to ensure that now we've got to this critical stage, that progress is made more rapidly, he can be assured that it has my utmost attention, as it has done in recent months.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that further response and sympathise with the predicament. Peel Ports chronically underinvested in the harbour for years, and when Save Ardrossan Harbour and Arran for Ardrossan Harbour came to Holyrood, the Cabinet Secretary met them, while Peel wouldn't when they protested outside their Glasgow HQ. And while the Scottish Government has declined to comment on active commercial negotiations, Peel accused it of not matching their pace, energy and commitment. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that, to right the wrong of the Tory privatisation of Ardrossan Harbour, Peel Ports should cease trying to hold Scottish taxpayers to ransom and sell the port lock, stock and barrel for a fair price now?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree a fair price is absolutely essential. He is also correct to remind the Chamber that this is a result of the Conservative privatisation of ports and indeed the long history. And indeed he also recognises the key to this, why we are doing it, is to ensure the investment, both in the short term and the long term, is made to ensure that there is a secure and sustainable future for Ardrossan Harbour.
Jamie Green.
Presiding Officer, let's not forget it was Humza Yousaf, when he was Transport Minister, promised the upgrade of Ardrossan Harbour. This Government has had years to get on with the job. Peel Ports have accused the Government of not matching pace, energy and commitment to the negotiations, and they say that it must be a higher priority. So I hope that is the case moving forward. But can I ask specifically if the Cabinet Secretary would consider extending the window of opportunity for compensation beyond today being the last day to apply for it, because there are businesses out there who still need cash and are not aware of the scheme? But secondly, will that scheme be extended to businesses in Ardrossan? Because I don't want to see a single small business in Ardrossan lose business or go bust as a result of this sorry saga.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I know the Liberal Democrat member has taken the side of Peel Ports and accepted their interpretation. Can I say, as the Cabinet Secretary, I'm trying to ensure that there are constructive discussions between both parties, and indeed both are giving this the attention that is required. He refers to a separate scheme that had been announced by the Rural Affairs and Islands Secretary to help support islanders. I understand there has been an extension for that period. My main concern for Ardrossan is to keep it as open and operating as long as possible, and that is why we're providing additional funding to ensure there is a two-port provision where it's possible. But I'm also very conscious that there will be a period when there is investment that will mean that harbour will be closed, and I think we should be turning our attention to how we can support businesses through that very practical stage.
And Katie Clark.
In February, after years of the Scottish Government ridiculing those arguing for the public ownership of Ardrossan Harbour, the Transport Cabinet Secretary announced in Rural Affairs portfolios that they now supported it. The Scottish Government knew more than 10 years ago, when they decided to commission the two Arran ferries, that they didn't fit into Ardrossan Harbour, that the Scottish Government didn't own Ardrossan Harbour, and that it was going to be very difficult to get a deal with the owners. But they spent years failing to take the necessary compulsory action. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that the Scottish Government have failed the people of Arran and Ardrossan?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, I don't, and I'd be interested if this is the new Labour Party's policy to have compulsory purchase of ports and harbours in Scotland. I think that might be news to a lot of investors who are wanting to create jobs and provide things. The member was not a member of this Parliament, and she is rehearsing an argument which I think is more about propaganda. Presiding Officer, I think this is very important to the people of Ardrossan.
Let's hear one another.
I think the member is perhaps in her anger betraying, I think, her regret that actually progress is being made. But if she thinks compulsory purchase was ever a legal solution, or indeed is a solution for this or other ports, then I think the Labour Party needs to look very seriously at its economic case.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is a statement by Mary McCallan on tackling the housing emergency. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. Cabinet Secretary, up to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. On 11th June, I was appointed Scotland's first Cabinet Secretary for Housing, with the First Minister placing homes at the heart of his government. A safe, warm and secure and affordable place to call home is fundamental to a life of dignity and opportunity. We have long believed this, and since coming to government have invested considerably in it. Since 2007, we've helped deliver more than 139,000 affordable homes, with 99,000 of these available for social rent. This has resulted in the delivery of affordable homes in Scotland being 47% more per head of population than in England and 73% more than in Wales. We have also legislated for some of the most protective anti-homelessness laws of any country and have fully mitigated the UK Government's bedroom tax so that no one in Scotland pays it. Despite this, after years of financial strain from UK austerity and Brexit, the pandemic and other inflationary pressures, there is unprecedented strain in demand for and supply of housing. Presiding Officer, since declaring a housing emergency, significant progress has been made. In May, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice updated Parliament on our targeted work to date. This included helping some 2,700 households with children into affordable homes to the year December 24, and bringing almost 1,000 homes back into use in 24-25 through our targeted £40 million investment. We also increased our affordable home supply programme budget to £768 million this year, able to deliver a further 8,000 affordable homes. Additionally, the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership reported earlier today that 2,066 privately owned long-term empty homes were returned to use in 24-25. This is the highest annual amount in 15 years and brings the total homes returned to nearly 13,000. However, there is still much to do and we must go further. The action plan I'm setting out today does that. Over the summer, I have worked extensively with partners across the housing sector. It was very important to me to understand their challenges and hear their proposed solutions. My resultant plan is centred on 3 core missions. Firstly, on ending children living in unsuitable accommodation, as part of this government's work to eradicate child poverty. Secondly, supporting the housing needs of vulnerable communities. And lastly, building our future, maximising growth and investment in Scotland's housing sector. Presiding Officer, children should not live in accommodation which is unsuited to their needs. And whilst temporary accommodation is a vital safety net for families, it must be just that, temporary. John Swinney's government is working to eradicate child poverty, and therefore, through this plan, we will double our acquisition fund from £40 million to £80 million this year, bringing our total additional targeted investment to £120 million since the emergency was declared. This will support the acquisition of at least 1,200 homes over the 18 months of the fund, helping between 600 and 800 children quickly move out of temporary accommodation and into permanent tenancies. I will work with COSLA and with local authorities to make clear our expectation that this funding be concentrated on family-sized homes where they are required. Following the guidance produced by Alacho on flipping temporary accommodation to a settled residence, we will ask councils to now contact every household with children in good quality temporary accommodation to examine flipping opportunities, with this fund helping to replenish temporary stock. We'll invest £2 million in discretionary housing payments to support households currently in temporary accommodation to find settled homes in the private rented sector. We will fund pilots, such as private sector leasing schemes, to tackle the use of unsuitable B&Bs and hotels. And subject to parliamentary approval of the housing bill, we will introduce a long-term system of rent controls to ensure affordability. Presiding Officer, as well as the availability of homes, I'm also focused on the quality. No one in Scotland, and especially no child, should live with damp or mould. So I can confirm that, should Parliament agree, we will raise the standard and quality of all rented accommodation in Scotland by bringing Awab's law into force in the social and private rented sectors from March next year. Presiding Officer, I'll now turn to the second pillar of my plan, supporting the housing needs of vulnerable communities. Following Cabinet this morning, I visited the exceptional Scottish Women's Aid team in Edinburgh. I heard from staff who've worked with survivors and their children when they are trying to leave an abusive partner. Domestic abuse is the leading cause of homelessness amongst women, and I know how financial support can help women with children be free of abusive men. Presiding Officer, no woman should flee violence only to face homelessness. That's why my plan will establish a national fund to leave, backed this year by £1 million, to help up to 1,200 women and their children leave an abusive relationship. We know another vulnerable group are those with multiple and complex needs. They are at risk of cyclical homelessness and rough sleeping. Over the summer, I have met with those benefiting from and helping to facilitate Housing First. The stories of resilience, of hope and recovery, they will always stay with me. And to support them, I can confirm we will now invest an additional £4 million this year to expand the delivery of Housing First tenancies. And in response to strong calls from the sector, we will extend Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan funding to 26-27 and invest £500,000 in winter preparedness measures to ensure people get a suitable bed for the night in the cold winter months. Looking forward, Presiding Officer, I'm focusing on building our future by maximising growth and investment in Scotland's housing sector. This means continuing to invest extensively in affordable homes and, at the same time, working to create the optimum conditions to foster confidence and investment. I referred earlier to the valuable engagement with partners this summer. In this, there was a consistent call for the certainty that multi-year funding trajectories can provide. Today, the Scottish Government is positively answering that call, and I confirm that we will provide that multi-year funding forward look. We will complement this with a new delivery ambition to increase delivery across all tenures by at least 10% each year over the first 3 years of the next Parliament. In support of this ambition, and knowing how vital continued development is to both availability and affordability, I take this opportunity to confirm my intention in principle to exempt mid-market rent and build-to-rent properties where appropriate from the rent controls being introduced in the Housing Scotland Bill. Such exemptions would be designed to protect and promote investment in these sectors and were a clear call from our Housing Investment Task Force. We will work with East Lothian Council and private sector partners to unlock investment in the new town Blindwells, with the potential to deliver 10,000 homes. And I'll also support first-time buyers on low or medium incomes by reopening the open market shared equity scheme to them. Presiding Officer, as a rural MSP, I know well how the housing challenges differ between Scotland's diverse places. As well as continuing to fund the Rural and Islands Housing Fund, we will expand our work engaging public bodies, landowners and the Scottish National Investment Bank to unlock land for housing in rural Scotland. Now, key to all of this is our planning system. The Planning and Housing Emergency Delivery Plan of November last year set out 23 actions, and we have made good progress against these. My action plan takes our planning commitments further. I can confirm today that we will issue a new notification direction to planning authorities, through which ministers will closely monitor the application of planning policy and intervene where needed. The Minister for Public Finance, Chief Planner and I will also write to planning authorities, setting out our expectations of customer service and proportionality when dealing with SME house builders, and separately to all planning stakeholders on our expectation of an emergency-led approach across development plan preparation and the determination of planning applications. Finally, Presiding Officer, I referred earlier to our commitment to offer multi-year funding certainty. Having confirmed this, I'm pleased to go further today by accompanying this forward look with a significant step up in funding. I'm pleased to confirm that we will invest up to £4.9 billion over the coming 4 years, supporting the delivery of around 36,000 affordable homes, providing up to 24,000 children with a warm, safe home. While further details will be outlined in the forthcoming spending review, the delivery will be a mixture of public and privately leveraged investment. Presiding Officer, it is a rounded and ambitious package that I present today. I trust that members will find much within it to welcome. What they will not find, Presiding Officer, is a single word dedicated to spreading fear and division in our communities. They will not find a single word scapegoating those who seek refuge in Scotland. I call on the UK Home Office to properly fund and organise their asylum processes, but I recommit Scotland to be a welcoming and inclusive nation. Presiding Officer, I call on all partners to join us in delivering the bold actions set out in my plan today, not least members of the Housing to 2040 Board, whose support and enthusiasm I so value. Let's now work together to turn our commitment into action and action into early, positive and lasting change. Thank you.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. And I do welcome that the Scottish Government is discussing an issue which is actually devolved to this Parliament, in a week where we are spending 3 hours of valuable parliamentary time discussing foreign affairs. It's been over a year since this Parliament declared a housing emergency. Many of us hoped at the time this would create an imperative on the Scottish Government to build more homes more quickly. Instead, just 7,444 affordable homes were completed in 2024-25, down 22% on the previous year and around half of the 15,000 affordable homes that housing charities say we need to meet current demand. Rather than increasing the affordable housing supply, the SNP have pressed ahead with a housing bill which doesn't build a single home. They have imposed disastrous rent controls on the sector, and nearly 5,000 landlords have exited the market in the past year, a figure that is likely to rise unless the SNP makes housing a more attractive area for investment. So if the Cabinet Secretary is serious about tackling this housing emergency, will she commit to go further than what she has today to attracting and utilising private finance to achieve the target of 15,000 affordable homes per year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, firstly, Megan Gallagher does herself absolutely no credit with her comments about international affairs. The issues for discussion are very important to the people of Scotland and they should be heard in this Parliament. As regards housing, I would just simply urge a bit of humility, perhaps a little bit of self-reflection on behalf of Megan Gallagher and her colleagues, because if it weren't for the Conservatives, with their relentless austerity agenda, with their complete mismanagement of the United Kingdom's economy, and with the pursuit of the hardest of hard Brexits, then the prevailing economic conditions in this country would not have been so unfavourable in recent years, and households would not have been pushed to the brink the way they have been, increasing homelessness across this country. So I would encourage Megan Gallagher to have another look at my statement, see how it speaks to creating favourable conditions for investment, and come back to me if she wants to have a sensible conversation.
Mark Griffin.
Thank you, President Officer. 2 years ago, housing emergencies were declared across Scotland. A year and a half ago, the Government acknowledged the crisis. Today, Elatcho reports that councils remain just as overwhelmed as they were 3 years ago, and the Government response doesn't match the scale of that challenge. The promise to move 600 to 800 children out of temporary accommodation is good news for those children, but with over 10,000 kids living in unacceptable conditions, when will the Government end the use of unsuitable temporary accommodation for children? Secondly, the statement includes a passing mention of planning, but without meaningful planning reform, we won't build the homes we need. Can the Cabinet Secretary say if the Government will restore the policy in favour of sustainable development to kick-start the house building we need? And finally, Presiding Officer, we welcome the increase in funding and stability after years of SNP cuts. But a 10% rise in starts over 3 years falls far short of the 15,000 affordable homes that Shelter and CIH say are essential. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary finally, when does she believe that the housing and homeless emergency will end?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the housing emergency and homelessness in part of that is a very complex picture. It is multifaceted. I don't personally believe we should be trying to tie it down to KPIs and figures to be measured. But in the generality, the housing emergency will be over when people can fully utilise the protective anti-homelessness legislation that we're very proud to have in this country, and when supply and demand and availability of social housing is met. And I hope that if he can look through the broad commitments that the Government has made today in this plan, he will see a series of actions that will bring that together. Immediate action, investing in the acquisition of homes to take children out of temporary and unsuitable accommodation right now. Directions and advice to local authorities to contact every home with children who are in a temporary but suitable home to consider flipping that to a permanent residency. That can make a difference now. And overwhelmingly, what will make a difference is our commitment to multi-annual funding certainty and a significant increase in the funding of affordable homes in Scotland. Everybody working on this understands that the provision of affordable homes is the way to tackle this, and he will see that committed to in this statement.
Marie McNair to be followed by Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's return to Parliament and I wish her well in her new role. Following on from the recent evidence on domestic abuse taken at the Social Justice and Social Security Committee, it was clear that women's experience of homelessness was very different to the experiences of men, and so the response to their housing needs should be very different. Can the Cabinet Secretary say more on how the Scottish Government is working to support women fleeing domestic abuse as a key part of addressing homelessness pressures?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I said in my statement, domestic abuse is the leading cause of homelessness for women in Scotland, and to this Government that is unacceptable. There are many barriers that can prevent somebody who is experiencing domestic abuse from deciding and being able to leave that relationship. It can be a very dangerous and difficult time. So I'm pleased that we have been able today to commit to rolling the fund to leave out on a national basis. We know from our piloting of the fund that it has a positive impact. Women who are experiencing domestic abuse will be able to apply for a grant to pay for the essentials that they need when leaving a relationship with an abusive partner. And we believe that the £1 million investment in our new national fund could help 1,200 women and their children to do just that.
McCall, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Cabinet Secretary, Scotland has a record high number of more than 10,000 children growing up in temporary accommodation, with a huge knock-on effect to their mental health, their education and their life's prospects. The statement refers to an additional £40 million for the acquisition fund, bringing it to £120 million so far, which hasn't done anything nearly enough or brought the number below that 10,000 record. So how can the Cabinet Secretary possibly assure this chamber that these targeted investments are anywhere close to the radical action needed? And how is any more investment going to actively change the lives of Scotland's children? Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I would just respond to that by highlighting that for the 2,700 households with children who have been assisted into affordable housing in the year to December 24 with this Government's work, they're not going to recognise the characterisation that has been put to me there. Nor will the people who are now living in the 2,066 formerly long-term empty properties which this Government's investment in the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership has helped to turn into a settled home. I would just ask her to reflect on those figures.
Willie Coffey, to be followed by Paul Sweeney.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise how the Scottish Government will prioritise the delivery of multi-year funding for the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, and what positive impact this is expected to have in East Ayrshire and across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Government's core priorities will sit at the heart of the spending review process and will guide where and to what extent funding is allocated. Now, we have recognised today that affordable housing is central to delivering against our priorities as a government, and in particular that leading priority of eradicating child poverty, as well, of course, as growing our economy and tackling net zero. So we have responded to the asks of the sector for multi-year funding, and I hope it will give that certainty and confidence that's so required for investments. And of course this will apply across East Ayrshire, where I know the area is currently benefiting from almost £13 million of investment being made available this year, with further details to follow.
Paul Sweeney, to be followed by Elena Whittam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her place. As she observed, Glasgow has a long and proud history of welcoming those in need, including thousands of people seeking asylum through the Home Office's dispersal programme since it started in 1999. But in 2022, the Government removed the local connection rule for homeless applications, including refugees. It was done in good faith to allow homeless people greater autonomy to control their lives. However well-intentioned, the measure has inadvertently increased pressure on Glasgow's homelessness services. Last year, over 1 in 10 homeless applications came from asylum seekers granted refugee status outside Scotland, who then moved to Glasgow as a local connection isn't required. And the Council estimate that this year almost half of all homeless cases in the city will involve people granted asylum in other dispersal cities like London, Belfast, Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool, creating an overspend of £66 million by next year. So will the Cabinet Secretary review the suspension of local connection rules, retaining exemptions for particularly vulnerable groups such as domestic abuse survivors, given the immediate and urgent housing pressure in Glasgow?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, I thank Paul Sweeney for that question. We keep all of the means by which we respond to homelessness under review, but I will confirm today we have no intentions to roll back from the changes this Government put in place in respect of local connection. Now, there are significant levels of asylum decision-making by the UK Home Office is putting significant pressure on Scottish local authorities, not least Glasgow. But the challenges that are arising, they're not the fault of refugees, who continue to be valuable members of our communities and who will be treated respectfully. The issue lies at the door of the UK Home Office, and I would ask Paul Sweeney to support me, to support Susan Aitken, the leader of Glasgow City Council, as we call on his colleagues in the UK Home Office to manage their asylum processes more reasonably and back it with more money, because that's what's required to make sure that the system works well for those seeking asylum and for others on housing waiting lists.
There's much interest in this statement. I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses. I call Elena Whittam.
Secretary's focus today on significant investment and focus on the whole of the housing system. We need a focused, holistic emergency response to deliver for our communities. Shelter Scotland's Commission report, Affordable Housing Need in Scotland post-2026, published today, highlights the sharp rise in temporary accommodation usage since 2020 and the urgent need for increased investment. Bringing empty homes back into use is key to this, so can the Cabinet Secretary please outline how the Scottish Government is working with local authorities to ensure this is done urgently and blockages in the system are removed? And can she advise what impact this investment will have on ensuring more children have access to safe and secure homes, with temporary stays being as brief as possible and avoided altogether in the cases of domestic abuse? And may I refer members to my register of interest as a member of Shelter Scotland's committee?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I would first of all wish to agree with the principle of Elena Whittam's question, which is that we have to pull every lever in order to respond to homelessness and the housing emergency. That means delivering more homes, but it also means using existing homes to better effect, and certainly bringing private, long-term empty homes back into use. Now, I mentioned in my statement how our investment in the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership is doing just that, and how figures this morning set out that last year was a record number of empty homes brought back into use via that means, 2,066. And I would also stress that we are continuing our investment in that fund. And I would also direct Elena Whittam to speak with my colleague Ivan McKee, who I have been working with on planning and how that can facilitate all that we wish to achieve in housing.
Thank you. Ariane Burgess, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Renters across Scotland have been hit by outrageous rent demands. Earlier this year, the Scottish Government ended temporary rent controls that were meant to protect tenants from large hikes until permanent rent controls came into force. Living Rent reports that since the end of those controls in April, there have been 175 cases where landlords have requested a 20% increase on average. 41 landlords proposed rent increases above 30%. Some went as high as 88%. The Cabinet Secretary has clearly been listening to the landlord lobby with some of the rent controls exemptions she's announced today. And given the massive hikes renters are facing, will she also acknowledge the plight of tenants and support the Green Amendment to reinstate temporary controls until the housing bill comes into effect?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, affordability of rents is one of the key points that requires attention as we respond to the housing emergency. And I made very clear that my commitment to that when I met with Living Rent over the summer. Now, the housing bill that is currently going through Parliament, that is approaching stage 3, it contains a system of long-term, national, evidence-based rent control provisions, which I will be glad, if subject to Parliament's approval, to see on the statute book so that it can support tenants with affordability across Scotland.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Ben Macpherson.
I think the Cabinet Secretary knows that the most significant change in its housing policy has been to dispense with some of the more damaging elements of the proposed housing bill, but also the reversal of the cuts to the affordable housing budget. We're still in a housing emergency, and the scale of the plan set out today does not meet the scale of the problem that we face. But can I ask about investment, particularly about those exemptions on rent controls? She talks about mid-market rents and build-to-rent. Will that cover both the private sector as well as the housing associations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the regulations through which those exemptions will be set out, or at least it's my intention that they shall be set out because it's subject to Parliament, will consider all of the detail that Willie Rennie is asking me about today, and for absolute clarity and for accuracy, I will await that process being undertaken before we confirm that. But I shall be very glad to discuss all of this with Willie Rennie and with partners across the chamber.
Ben Macpherson, to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Presiding Officer, the housing emergency has been decades in the making since Thatcherism, and it is the biggest issue for millennials and those younger. Therefore, I warmly welcome this significant investment from the Scottish Government announced today. And does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that both private and public spending on house building is an investment in our national infrastructure, and we need to approach it in that mindset and focus on quality of build so that we create new buildings that last for many decades? And will the investment that's been announced be targeted in areas with the most pressure on the housing system, like here in the capital city?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, a number of the pots of additional funding that the Government have released in response to the emergency have been directed to the local authorities with the most sustained temporary accommodation and homelessness pressures, and it's my intention that a number of the pots announced today will continue to do that, and I will work with COSLA and with local authorities on that. But on the general point, the Scottish Government agreed with the recommendation of the Housing Investment Task Force, who published their report in June, that housing should be recognised as critical infrastructure, and I would hope that Ben Macpherson, reviewing what is contained in the statement today, will see that I have brought that to bear in the commitments made.
Alexander Stewart, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary. Affordable Housing Supply Programme budget has only increased by £12 million since 2018-19 against the financial backdrop. How did the Scottish Government expect the affordable housing demand will be met when a report from Shelter, the Chartered Institute of Housing and Scottish Federation of Housing Associations found that £900 million a year is needed to meet the affordable housing demand?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, this is a reasonable question that is put to me because, well, I suppose there's 2 points to flag here. Firstly, let's not forget the economic circumstances that we have been coming through in recent years and the impact this will have on value for money and the ability of the Affordable Home Supply Programme to go further in delivering housing. Let's remember that construction inflation reached 24% in summer 2022. All the while, we are dealing with Scotland's capital block grant being expected to reduce by 1.1% to the period to 29-30. So, Mr Stewart is absolutely right to recognise the difficulties that the Government is wrestling with, many of which are out with our control, but he will see in this statement and from the Scottish Government a determination to overcome them and to make sure that there is sufficient affordable housing for the population of Scotland.
Rona Mackay, to be followed by Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary please advise how tackling the housing emergency by making sure families have access to a home will work towards the Scottish Government's core mission of eradicating child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think there are a number of statistics and of research methodology that I could point to and that will be available in time to come. But I suppose what I would say in general is that we all know that having a safe, warm and secure place to call home is absolutely fundamental to a life of dignity and opportunity and to the eradication of child poverty in Scotland. And I hope she will find, therefore, that it is that commitment is throughout this statement.
Jeremy Balfour, to be followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her position? A recent report from Shelter Scotland shockingly states that there are more children in temporary accommodation in Edinburgh than there are temporary accommodation in the whole of Wales. How can our capital city still be in such a crisis a year after we declared a housing emergency? And what practically will she do to help Edinburgh City Council move on from this situation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, on the question of practical matters, I would just refer the member to the statement. It takes members through some immediate actions, £40 million of additional funding and acquisitions, £2 million in discretionary housing payments to support moves to the private rented sector, and fundamentally a significant uplift in funding for affordable homes, coupled with multi-annual certainty on the funding trajectory. Together, coupled with the other provisions in the plan, that is exactly how we will combat the quite unacceptable situation that he is right to highlight, both in Edinburgh but in other local authority areas throughout Scotland.
Sharon Dowie, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all recognise the scale of the housing emergency and the need to get homes built quickly. But what action is the Cabinet Secretary taking to unblock housing developments that already have funding and approvals in place but are being held up by government processes?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I would refer Sharon Dowie to firstly our planning and housing emergency delivery plan, which was published last November and which action continues to be taken against, not least our action to remove barriers on stalled housing sites, the putting in place of our national planning hub, the recruitment of 17 future planners to work with the Scottish Government whilst they study their master's degree in planning, and of course the trebling of the number of bursaries for student planners for this year. That was our commitments from November. She will find a boosting of that in my statement today, not least my intention to create a new notification direction where ministers will observe and oversee how national housing policy is applied.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. Can I also welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her position? We've had a couple of very useful discussions over the summer, and I'm pleased that she agrees with me on exemptions to rent controls, and she also agrees with me on the need for AWAB's law to deal with damp and mould in all rented homes. And on that, can I ask if she's willing to work with me on a possible amendment to stage 3 of the housing bill? And can she also tell us what kind of enforcement mechanisms she foresees being introduced to make sure that landlords comply?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I have had engagement with Graham Simpson over the summer on the detail of the Housing Scotland Bill, and it's my intention that that engagement will continue with him, as it will with other interested parties across the Parliament in advance of stage 3.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement. I will allow a moment or two for front benches to organise for the next item of business.
Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on First Minister John Swinney to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 13 minutes, please.
President Officer, I move the motion in my name. We gather today at the start of the 5th and final year of the 6th session of Scotland's National Parliament. Our Parliament is over a quarter of a century old, its place anchored at the heart of decision-making in Scotland today. A Parliament elected to chart a way forward for Scotland and to wrestle with the challenges that face our people. And in this session of Parliament, our country has faced a number of those challenges. The lasting effects of the COVID pandemic, the illegal invasion of Ukraine and its consequences for energy costs and security. In the Middle East, we have witnessed, and I have repeatedly condemned, Hamas's barbaric attacks on the 7th of October 2023, and I also share the concerns of other governments and other international leaders that the brutal actions of the Israeli government in Gaza constitute a genocide. This has unleashed widespread suffering and caused such anguish. And in the UK, we are seeing the prolonged application of austerity at a time of desperate need to rebuild in our society. So these are difficult days. And for many in our society, the implications of these events are that money is tight, prices are rising, and hope is in short supply. And the danger in such circumstances is that all of those difficulties are marshalled together to be made the fault of others in our society, that some get blamed for supposedly causing these problems. And that has been ever present during the summer recess. when migrants have been put in the spotlight and the politics of intolerance have been stoked by some. Well, let me be clear at the outset of this final year of this parliamentary session that I reject that demonising behaviour. Let me be clear that I intend to defeat the politics of fear and division by offering a clear, principled alternative based on the decent, welcoming values that have served Scotland so well throughout my lifetime. That is why I want to use every opportunity available to my government to give that leadership to Scotland and to deliver improvements in the lives of people in Scotland. Since becoming First Minister, I have heard loud and clear the desire of the people for both effective delivery in government alongside a meaningful message of hope. Today, I will speak mostly about how we have, how we are and how we will continue to deliver for the people of Scotland in ways that will improve their lives. It is a story of much achieved but more still to do, of a corner that is being turned, of progress that is once again being made. So let me start with the National Health Service. I often hear my political rivals say that the National Health Service is broken. I reject that. I say thanks to our dedicated staff, Scotland's National Health Service remains fundamentally strong and an asset for this country. Yes, it has problems. Why would it not, after a decade and more of Westminster austerity, after Brexit and after the foundation-shaking experience of COVID? And that's not just my view, but that is what the Labour Party says about the NHS in Labour-run Wales into the bargain. But in Scotland, 97% of people leave hospital with no delay. 95% are registered with an NHS dentist. And since November 2023, 7 million treatments have been delivered. Scotland's core accident and emergency system has consistently outperformed those in England and Wales for the last decade, repeated again in the most recent figures. And these are not just numbers. Last year, over 1 million patients were seen within 4 hours in our accident and emergency system, around 1 in every 30 seconds in Scotland. I'll give way to Mr Cole-Hamilton.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
To the First Minister for giving way. I'm sure that everyone across this chamber will support our hard-working NHS staff. But does he recognise that those words will come as cold comfort to everyone who's been waiting in line on a phone call for a GP appointment this afternoon? For every one of the 2,000 Scots who are stuck in hospital well enough to go home but too frail to do so without a care package? And will he recognise that that will come as cold comfort for everyone looking for social care in general in our communities?
First Minister.
Let me just address those particular issues. We promised 150,000 extra appointments and procedures in our programme for government, but we now expect to exceed this and deliver 213,000. That means in total we will deliver an extra 300,000 appointments and procedures. Extra capacity that means right now inpatient waiting lists are falling. Right now, a record number of hip and knee replacements are being carried out. Right now, an increase in the number of paramedics, an increase in the number of GPs, and more people surviving cancer than ever before. So yes, there is work to be done, but substantial progress has been made in strengthening the National Health Service under this government's leadership of the National Health Service.
Rachel Hamilton.
I totally believe that John Swinney's just making up what he's saying here. There are 900,000 people on waiting lists. That is 1 in 6 people waiting. What has he got to say to my constituents and everybody else waiting on lists who are in pain?
First Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to reinforce the point that I said a moment ago. The extra capacity that means right now inpatient waiting lists are falling in Scotland, and I'm happy to put that on the record once again for Rachel Hamilton's benefit today. And today, the latest statistics confirm this progress, with planned care activity up and the number of operations performed in July 2025 at the highest level in over 5 years. The CAMS waiting time standard met for the 3rd time in a row, and the lowest number of 8 and 12-hour waits for A&E since September 2023, despite the highest July attendance level for 6 years. That is not a broken National Health Service. That is a National Health Service we can be proud of. An NHS that after COVID and after this government's decision to put record investment into the National Health Service, record investment, of course, that neither the Labour Party nor the Conservatives in this Parliament supported, is getting better once again. Much achieved, yes, but much more to do to strengthen the National Health Service in Scotland. Thanks to choices made here in Scotland, child poverty is now lower than it has been for a decade, despite UK Government actions that have pushed more children below the poverty line. Indeed, if Scotland had the same rate of child poverty as the rest of the United Kingdom, an additional 90,000 Scottish children would be in poverty. Progress delivered because of innovative policies, made in Scotland policies such as the Scottish Child Payment, but also because of the prioritisation, because of the hard work of bringing people together to ensure that we delivered those lower levels of child poverty in Scotland. And that has an effect on our schools, where free school meals have been expanded and where the Pupil Equity Fund has enabled 3,000 additional staff to be employed, staff who can work with children to ensure they have more of the support that they need to thrive. The first fruits of these interventions can now be seen. I'll give way to Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank the First Minister for taking the intervention. Can the First Minister set out to the Chamber how many newly qualified teachers are unemployed this year as a result of this government's failure to match supply and demand in the teaching workforce?
Well, what's helped in relation to the recruitment of teachers has been the pupil equity funding that we've put into the budget, the increased levels of local government funding that the Finance Secretary put into the budget, and which Pam Duncan-Glancy was unable to vote for when the budget came to Parliament. So that didn't help. That didn't help one tiny little bit. The first fruits of these interventions can now be seen, Presiding Officer, with more Scots from the most deprived areas entering university full-time, with the poverty-related attainment gap continuing to narrow at all three key qualification levels. Across the board, more and more Scottish children are getting the chance to learn and to grow in skills and in confidence, with attainment levels in key stages of primary school and secondary school in literacy and numeracy reaching record highs. And there's progress too on the economy. Scotland is by far the fastest growing start-up economy in the United Kingdom and one of the fastest growing in Europe. Here, new business incorporations have increased by almost a fifth in the first half of 2025 compared with the final 6 months of 2024. We remain the best place outside London for attracting overseas investment. Investment in the tech sector alone has increased by a massive 120% between 2020 and 2024. Wages are up in real terms, unemployment is down and our economy is growing. Much achieved and more to do, and no doubt more will be done, because life is tough right now for the people we serve and we are acting to address those concerns. I'll give way to Mr Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
Most grateful to the First Minister for giving way. Whilst Norway forges ahead, our oil and gas industry is dying before our very eyes. Will the First Minister at last support it, or will he, like a modern-day Brutus, go down in history as its co-assassin?
First Minister.
I think the voices in the oil and gas sector that speak to me tell me that the cost regime that is applied by the taxation levels of the United Kingdom Government, which this Government does not support, is the actions that are undermining investment to sustain activity in the North Sea, as this Government invests heavily in supporting the energy transition that we have to make to ensure that we achieve our objectives on climate change. And that brings me to my comments on energy. Now, I know that people in Scotland share my frustration that households are not feeling the benefit of the rapid expansion of low-cost renewable energy generation here in Scotland. A clear Scottish policy success is not delivering the savings to consumers that it should because of policy choices made by successive United Kingdom governments, and some of what Mr Ewing has just raised with me is relevant in that respect. Westminster will happily take our energy, but they will do nothing to lower our energy bills and nothing to give Scottish business the competitive advantage of lower energy costs. That's why Scotland's energy resources should be in Scotland's hands, but that can only come with the control that independence would give to the people of Scotland. It's my firm belief that our vast low-cost renewable energy generation has the capacity to be as transformational for Scotland's economy and for the wealth of our people as corporation tax was for Ireland's. It has the capacity to send Scotland on a new and a more prosperous course. The fundamental truth that anchors all of my politics is that the people who care most about Scotland, the people who choose to live here, should be the ones setting our nation's course, not politicians in Westminster for whom Scotland is too often just an afterthought. It is a principle that has been delivered in part by the creation of this Parliament. We have some ability, but limited ability, to shape our nation. But for so long as the big decisions over our budget, over our economy, over immigration, membership of the EU, energy, jobs and wages are taken elsewhere, there is a brake on what our country can achieve. Westminster choices that hold us back when we should be moving forward. Let's take immigration. Not having control of immigration means that our National Health Service and our care homes are facing a critical staff shortage. The UK Government has made it more difficult for them to recruit abroad, and that impacts on the levels of care that they can offer. It is a completely unnecessary problem, a problem manufactured by Westminster's toxic immigration debate, a Westminster policy that is doing and will do real damage to Scotland's National Health Service and our care sector. And the solution is a simple one. A Parliament with a power... The First Minister is concluding. I'll need to bring my remarks to a close. A Parliament with the power to create an immigration policy that actually works for the people of Scotland. We move ahead on eradicating child poverty, and then a new Westminster decision pushes us back. We seek to create jobs and boost prosperity, but a clumsy, ill-judged Westminster National Insurance tax grab pushes businesses to the brink. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government will do everything we can within our powers to secure the future of the people of Scotland, to improve their lives. But make no mistake, this country needs to have the full powers of independence to transform the lives of our people, and this Government is going to work to deliver exactly that. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Russell Finlay to speak to and to move Amendment 1867 1.4. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. On just over 8 months' time, this parliamentary session comes to an end. Over the past 4 years, Parliament's achievements have been too few and its mistakes too many. Barely anything has been done to encourage the economic growth that powers our country and pays the bills. Little effort has been made to create jobs. There has been next to no consideration about how to make life easier for workers and businesses, or to give families a helping hand with ever-rising bills. This Government has nurtured a culture of anti-aspiration, holding back those who want to get on. In this time, when people have looked at Holyrood, they have been dismayed at what they have seen. They watched as the SNP passed extreme gender legislation. They watched the disastrous attempt at a deposit return scheme, which harmed business and hammered taxpayers. They watched them target free speech, criminalising what can be said in your own home. They watched them fail to build 2 ferries or stem the desperate death toll from drugs, as today's figures show. Why does almost everything that Holyrood touches go so badly wrong? Why does it waste so much time debating things that are either out with its remit or really not that important? All the while, it neglects the issues, the real issues that it does have the power to change. Now, whatever John Swinney claimed today, The blunt reality is that this Parliament has not focused on what people truly care about. It hasn't made it any easier to get a GP appointment. It hasn't fixed dangerous roads. It hasn't raised school standards. In short, Holyrood has not focused on Scotland's priorities. I will.
Does Russell Finlay think that this line of argument both keeps his MSPs and also keeps the population voting for him, given they are at record low levels at the moment? Do you think this is working for you and for your party?
Always through the chair. Russell Finlay.
Let's talk about this Parliament and what it can do, or rather what it is not do, because of this government. It does not look at the interests of those who are aspirational or ambitious, nor the priorities of workers and businesses, nor the priorities, frankly, of anyone in mainstream Scotland who just wants politicians to show some basic common sense. Since becoming an MSP in 2021, I've been struck by how disconnected this place is from the real world. I became a politician to get things done and try to make a difference to people's lives. But if you ask the average person what Holyrood has done to help them in the past 4 years, I do not think you would get a positive answer. Pose that question to a small business owner in Perth or Peebles struggling to stay afloat, or a high street worker in Dumfriesshire or Ayrshire trying to get a mortgage, or families in Glasgow and Edinburgh who work around the clock to make ends meet, while others stay idle only to get things handed to them on a plate. Or oil and gas workers in the North East, where I was this morning, and those at Grangemouth who think this government would rather they lost their jobs. Or young people leaving school across Scotland who despair at the lack of opportunity. Yes, I will.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Finlay for giving way. Let me just give him a flavour of some of the things the government is practically doing to help people with the cost of living challenges that they face, like the fact that council tax bills are generally 30% lower than south of the border, that water bills are 20% lower than south of the border, that yesterday we abolished peak rail fares, which will, for the average commuter between Edinburgh and Glasgow, will halve the cost of their rail journey on every single day. These are, and then for small businesses in Perth, there's many small businesses in Perth that will benefit from the small business bonus scheme that this government voted for in the budget and which Mr Finlay never voted for in the budget. So that's just a flavour of what the government's doing to protect people's income.
Russell Finlay.
That was a bit of a long intervention. I'm very glad that the First Minister listened to the Scottish Conservatives last December, who called for the end of peak rail fares. That was very good of him. But what he should also do is stop hammering households and businesses with additional tax and additional red tape. This Parliament must face up to the fact that the public agrees on one thing: this place isn't working for them. We are always elected to serve the interests of the public. In the short time before the next election, it's time that we started to do so. My party is the only one here willing to stand up and admit our mistakes, say plainly what we need to do better, and commit to change.
Members.
But we're really not the only ones, Neil Gray, who should be doing that. He's very noisy when he sat down.
Cabinet Secretary, please desist.
The only way any of us will win back public trust and earn the right to represent people is if we do things differently. And in the 8 months ahead, the Parliament has the opportunity to do that. Not fritter away endless time on debates that achieve nothing than let MSPs feel good about themselves. We need to use this time to kick-start Scotland's economy and get it growing again. We must make this a top priority. The focus of this Parliament should be on the creation of jobs and the expansion of business. We have to create the conditions for Scotland's economic renewal. We have to repair the relationship between Parliament and business. We have to nurture an environment where more people have confidence to start a business. More of the same from John Swinney is just not an option. Look at where we are now. 4 out of every 5 small and medium-sized enterprises in Scotland believe that their very survival is at risk over the next 12 months. Just 1 in 10 Scottish firms, that's 1 in 10, thinks the Scottish Government understands the business environment. A report from the CBI and the Fraser-Valander Institute found that the Scottish economy is struggling to keep pace with the UK-wide economy on almost every metric. John Swinney only knows how to squeeze more out of workers and businesses while imposing more rules that stifle innovation and expansion. For more than 18 years of SNP rule, our economy has been in decline. The business community feels overlooked or ignored. Workers don't get new opportunities from the SNP, they just get higher bills. The entire SNP economic model is at breaking point. Our country can't afford to keep spending so much on a huge and unreformed public sector and an ever-growing benefits bill. It's unsustainable to always take more and spend more. It's unfair to expect people to continually forfeit more of their own hard-earned money just to watch Holyrood politicians throw it down the drain. More of the same reckless agenda from John Swinney risks the solvency of Scotland. They need to abandon the folly of SNP economics, which prioritises abstract and woke thinking. And does anyone really know what the well-being economy actually is?
What is it?
And the only way to change is to instead put our focus on Scotland's economic renewal. Opportunity and aspiration, productivity and profit. That's where my party stands. We're going to reconnect with the astute values of mainstream Scotland. We will focus on efficient spending, we will champion self-reliance and demand freedom for people to aspire and to succeed. And we will bring forward common-sense solutions to cut red tape. A thriving economy gives us a chance to fix public services. A failing economy will mean only more of the same from this failing government. That's the choice facing this Parliament over the next 8 months. Take the path towards prosperity or stay on the SNP road to nowhere. That will be the choice facing the country next year. A continued slide into stagnation under the SNP or a new way forward for the common good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Finlay. And could I ask you to please move your amendment?
Move the amendment, yep.
Thank you very much. I now call on Anna Sarwar to speak to and to move Amendment 1867 1.2. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to welcome all members back to the Chamber for the new session. And it may be a new session, but for this knackered SNP government, it's just the same old script and the same old tired voices. No matter how much John Swinney shouts about hope and delivery, the truth is he's hopeless at delivery, and Scotland can see it. Because as much as he can try and reheat and rehash the same old playbook, the difference now is that Scots can see right through him. John Swinney talks of his priorities for Scotland, but in his own motion, he claims that the only way he can deliver on these priorities is, surprise, surprise, through independence. But I do want to give John Swinney credit. He is a politician of rare consistency. The guy that's been in government for almost 20 years and over that time has pleaded powerlessness all that time over his ability to actually improve Scotland for his entire career. And his answer to every hard question remains the same: blame somebody else or talk about independence. But while he continues to beat that drum, the people of Scotland are paying the price of his and his government's inaction. And the government's inaction is clear for all to see across all of John Swinney's stated claimed priorities. I'm happy to.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Sarwar for giving way. Now, I quoted a statistic in my speech, which was that if Scotland had the same level of child poverty as the rest of the United Kingdom, 90,000 more children would be living in poverty in Scotland today. Now, those figures are because of the actions that this Parliament and this Government has taken to keep children out of poverty. Why can't Mr Sarwar see the value of that impact on the lives of children in Scotland? And why is he prepared to support a Labour Government that's pushing child poverty in the opposite direction to the one it should be going in?
I welcome the Scottish Child Payment. It's something we have continually supported. But what this government is failing to do is to challenge structural poverty, which I'll come on to in a moment. Take our public services. On John Swinney's watch, our public services are in utter disarray. Almost 900,000 Scots are on an NHS waiting list. Over 100,000 Scots are waiting over a year for treatment. The number of cancer deaths is rising. A&E waits remain dangerously long, and former routine services like dentistry and hip and knee replacements are being slowly privatised due to the failure of the SNP to provide the level of services people need. Every single week, the Health Secretary says no, they're not. Every single week, Scottish families are forced to empty their savings or remortgage their homes to pay for medical treatment, and the responsibility for that lies with John Swinney and the SNP government. If the Health Secretary wants to stand up and apologise, he's free to do so.
Neil Gray.
Of course, I pointed this out to Jackie Baillie earlier, that the rate of private operations in the health service in Scotland is 54% lower than it is in the NHS in England. But does Anas Sarwar support his UK government colleagues in reducing the number of health and care visas being approved by 77% over the last year? And how does he think that and threatening the deportation of social care workers in Scotland is really going to help the health and social care services in Scotland?
Anas Sarwar.
There we go again, the same old playbook, blame somebody else. The harsh fact is this, that 40% of the hip and knee replacements that happen in our country happen in the private sector because of this government's incompetence. And our schools too are feeling the strain after 2 decades of the SNP. The poverty-related attainment gap stubbornly persists. Teacher numbers decimated in areas across Scotland, and teachers, pupils and parents are fearing for their safety as discipline breaks down in schools across Scotland, and again this government turns a blind eye. And John Swinney mentioned earlier on about tackling poverty and child poverty, but we all know that you can't properly tackle poverty unless you address the structural issues, one of which is ensuring that people have safe and secure homes to live in. And under the SNP, that is not the case for too many Scots. We're in the midst of a housing emergency. Record numbers of homeless children left to spend their nights in hotels and B&Bs, and house building completions are at record lows. And a generation of young Scots feel totally frozen out of the housing market with home ownership an unattainable dream. And again, the responsibility of that lies with John Swinney and this SNP government. And just this morning, the human cost of SNP failure was demonstrated again. 1,017 deaths from drug abuse in the last year. 6,000 deaths since the drugs crisis was declared. Drugs deaths still 3 times higher in Scotland than the rest of the UK, and the highest in Europe. Every single one of those, an avoidable death, precious lives lost needlessly because of the scourge of drugs. And again, some of that relates back to this government cutting rehab beds and cutting to our hard-pressed police and so much more. And again, the responsibility lies with John Swinney and this SNP government. But we all know John Swinney only really has one priority in the next 8 months: to somehow try and cling on to power. And he's going to use the independence card to keep his knackered, failing government in power. He's not interested in improving people's lives today, fixing services tomorrow, or making Scotland a better place anytime soon. It's just desperately talk about independence. But why is he doing it? Now, John Swinney is many things, but he's not daft. He's been in this game a very, very, very long time, and he knows he can't stand in that election on his records because Scots have had enough. And that's why he wants to try and make it about independence, not because he believes he can achieve it, not because he thinks Scotland can win, SNP can win a majority, but it's the only way he thinks he can keep enough people together to sneak over the line and cling on to power. It's cynical, it's desperate, and it's John Swinney all over, but I don't believe it will work, because Scots are canny and can see right through it. Now, John Swinney shouts about focus groups. The focus groups say you guys are out and getting beat. Because whether Scots voted yes or no, people have had enough, and they want a government that gets back to basics, that fixes the NHS, schools and transport, and they know the SNP is failing on every measure. And he wants to talk about focus groups. Ask the people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse who helped beat the SNP. Ask them in Barrhead who helped beat the SNP. And I can promise you, in Scotland next year, they're going to help us beat the SNP all over again. Because after nearly 2 decades, Scotland's crying out for a new direction. They want a government that will fix public services and get the basics right. They want a government that shares their ambitions for Scotland's future. And that's why we'll tackle the housing crisis by actually building the homes. We'll get our businesses growing by backing entrepreneurship. We will stop the antisocial behaviour in our schools by banning mobile phones, supporting teachers and supporting our communities. And we'll fix our NHS by taking on the bureaucrats, empowering doctors and pulling out all the stops to clear the backlogs. That's the new direction Scotland needs. New thinking, new ideas, new leadership, not the same old arguments from the same old knackered SNP. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Ross Greer to speak to and move Amendment 18671.3. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I move the amendment in my name. I think we do have a lot to be proud of. The Scottish Greens certainly have a lot to be proud of about this session of Parliament so far. The removal of peak rail fares that will save commuters hundreds and in some cases thousands of pounds. The fact that this is the only part of the UK where child poverty is going down. That just 2 weeks ago, when the schools started again, there were 6,000 more children eligible for free school meals as a result of agreements made in this Parliament. But we can't deny the fact that people are angry. Communities are being pulled apart. People, families feel unhappy. And it's because their lives are not getting better. This country isn't working for them. Whether it's the cost of living or the climate crisis, it's not because the systems are broken. They're rigged. And that's what we need to change. And to change it, we need to take on those who have rigged the system. We need to take on the super rich, the big polluters and the greedy landlords. My message to the people of Scotland is that the Scottish Green Party is on your side. We are fighting your corner. There are too many politicians, including now in this chamber, whipping up hatred in our communities, lying to the public about who the enemy is. Trans people and asylum seekers aren't the problem. They didn't sell off your community centre, privatise the buses or increase rents. We will take on the bigots and the con men directing that anger at the most vulnerable in our society. We will direct it at those who are often bankrolled by the people who are really at fault, the people who have really rigged the system. This country isn't working for ordinary people because it wasn't designed to. And I want to change that. I'm proud of the Greens' track record on changing the system. We have taken every opportunity to rebalance the scales in favour of our planet and ordinary people. We're delivering rent controls, taking power from the haves and giving it to the have-nots. We stand up for Scotland's natural heritage against corporate greed, like our campaign to protect Loch Lomond from Flamingo Land. And we have fundamentally transferred wealth in this society, taxing those who can afford it, to expand the Scottish child payment, to expand free school meals, to deliver free bus travel for young people, to buck that UK-wide trend of rising child poverty. And yes, I'm proud that we did that through cooperation with colleagues in the SNP. But there is so much more to do. That's why the Green Amendment today focuses on our public finances and tax. It is outrageous that, as the Scottish Government confirmed last week, the 2% richest households in this country have more wealth than the bottom 50%. The Finance Secretary agreed with me this morning that that is not good enough, but the Scottish Government does not appear to have a plan to go any further on wealth redistribution. I'm proud of what we've already done together, but more is clearly needed. We cannot lift more children out of poverty, cut emissions or hire more hospital staff without the money to pay for it. And people are sick of politicians with big promises, little follow-through and absolutely no plan to pay for what they've committed to. Greens have a plan, because we are brave enough to be honest with the electorate that a better society needs to be paid for, and the very wealthiest people can afford and should be paying far more. Now, despite the doomsday predictions over, I think, most of the last decade, changes in our tax policy delivered by the Greens have worked, and they are popular. Our income tax changes mean that this year alone there is £1.7 billion more to deliver for public services like our schools, our hospitals and public transport. We've doubled the additional dwelling supplement, taking on the buy-to-let landlords, particularly short-term landlords, and freeing up thousands of homes for young families to live in, whilst raising £250 million to invest into public services. And we've delivered more powers for local government, like the visitor levy, new powers that will raise millions of pounds to deliver on the issues that people really care about, like the quality of their roads and pavements, libraries and schools. But we need to recognise it is no wonder that people are angry when they see a hugely wealthy country, and this is one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, and they still cannot afford to take their children on a holiday. They can't even afford to buy new school uniforms. They can't afford their rent. That's why the Green Amendment calls on the Scottish Government to make bold use of its existing tax-raising powers, including the creation of new revenue-raising mechanisms for local government. And that, of course, means fixing our broken council tax system. It cannot be right that the poorest households are paying the highest share of their income in council tax. It cannot be right that we have a tax system where more than half of all households in this country are paying the wrong rate, one based on property values from before I was even born. And I say to the Scottish Government that their line that we can only achieve council tax reform through consensus just isn't going to work. There is no prospect of consensus, particularly looking ahead to the next session of Parliament. But there is a majority to deliver council tax reform if the Government are brave enough to lead that majority. It is absolutely true that Scotland has done more to tackle child poverty and the climate emergency than any other UK nation. But it is also true that we are still not doing enough on either. And indeed, when it comes to climate action, the Government's ambitions are being scaled back. Scotland needs MSPs and government ministers who are bold and brave enough to take on those who have rigged the system, the super-rich and the big polluters. Only by doing that can we defeat the forces of hate who are exploiting our communities and build the fairer, greener society that the vast majority of people in Scotland want to see.
Thank you. Could I remind those members who wish to speak in the debate to check that they have in fact pressed the request to speak buttons? And I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to speak to and to move Amendment 18671.1. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Before I start, can I associate myself with the remarks of the First Minister about the situation in Gaza? I think the scenes we've seen unfolding there, particularly this summer, should really strike humanitarian chord with every member in this chamber. Presiding Officer, from Stranraer to Shetland, from Skye to St Andrews, Scotland has so much going for it. But everywhere you go, people say that right now things feel broken. Talk to people the length and breadth of the country about how they're feeling. People are tired, they're frustrated, and they're right to be. And they will not stand for the protestations by this First Minister, who in addressing my intervention effectively took to the words of Jim Callaghan with crisis, what crisis? It is all around you. It can take weeks to see your GP. You are lucky if you can find an NHS dentist that will see you locally. And the waits for many operations and treatments are measured out in years. People are stuck in hospital because they can't get a care home place or the support they need to live back at home. Islanders are fed up of ferry cancellations. Communities are fed up of dangerous roads like the A9, the backbone of the Perthshire and Highland communities, which finishes each year with a body count. Families worry about violence at school, the lack of support for pupils who need it, and whether they can find childcare that fits around their work. I will take an intervention from Fergus Ewing.
I was pleased that Alex Cole-Hamilton mentioned the A9. Will the Liberals at the forthcoming election include a manifesto commitment to dual the A9 from Inverness to Perth and to bring forward, if possible, the completion of that dualling before the planned date of 2035?
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm grateful to Fergus Ewing. I also make the same commitment for the A96. Put simply, Presiding Officer, if the M8 was killing upwards of 10 people every year, it would be dualled by Christmas. And yet Highlanders have had to wait nearly 20 years of commitment after commitment only not to see that vital road dualled. People deserve better. Scotland deserves better, because nearly 2 decades into SNP rule, for so many people, it feels like our country simply isn't working as it should be, as it used to. The SNP have had long enough. We know that the only thing that will truly bring about change that Scotland needs is a change of government. Scotland needs change, and it needs to be change with fairness at its heart. Fairness for everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from. Liberal Democrats will always hold this government to account, but we will also roll up our sleeves, Presiding Officer, and get things done. It's what our councillors are doing, our MSPs are doing, and our record-breaking 72 Liberal Democrat MPs are doing as well. Presiding Officer, for us, the number one issue, both for the remainder of this term and the coming election, is the NHS and care in our communities. The equivalent of 1 in 6 Scots is now stuck on a waiting list. That means months of pain, anxiety, lost time. Liberal Democrats would invest in a first-rate health service so that you can see a GP or dentist when you need them. It's not that hard to imagine a time when we used to have that. That should be the aspiration now. We would deliver faster access to mental health treatment because nobody should be left waiting years for help. All these waits are holding people back. They're holding growth back. They are holding our country back. On doorsteps across Scotland, families tell me the same story. Their bills are soaring. Their money just doesn't go as far as it used to, and they're struggling to get by. We would tackle this head-on with a national programme of insulation to bring warmth to the homes of Scotland and to bring down stubbornly high fuel costs. We also want local communities to truly benefit from renewables projects in their area, so people actually see the gains from Scotland's energy wealth. To be shivering in the shadow of a wind turbine, unable to heat your home, that's not a fair deal. Not when you live in a part of the country that is a powerhouse for the renewables revolution that will move us to net zero and guarantees energy security for all of these islands. Jobs in the trades, warmer homes, lower bills. That's the practical difference a competent government can make. Presiding Officer, it's 10 years since Nicola Sturgeon promised to close the poverty-related attainment gap. It was the number one priority, the yardstick of SNP government. But Scottish education has fallen further down the international rankings. Parents and teachers are increasingly worried about what's happening in classrooms, especially the violence. Workforce planning is a mess, leaving good teachers out of work. And the progress of closing that yawning attainment gap has been minuscule. We urgently need a plan to drive up education performance and improve outcomes for our young people. It means recruiting and retaining great teachers, properly supporting pupils with additional support needs, and ensuring every child gets the best possible start in life. Presiding Officer, I'm not given to quoting the words of Kemi Badenoch, but I will do so now. They are in local communities. A typical Liberal Democrat will be somebody who is good at fixing their church roof. Presiding Officer, sneering at the Lib Dems for being a party that will come and fix your church roof and be in your local community, it's something we actually hold as a badge of honour. It shows exactly why the Conservatives have lost the public's trust. So many people who once backed Ruth Davidson are completely scunnered at what that party has turned into. So we will be the champions for every town and village in Scotland. Champions who will fight for carers, for those waiting on operations or care packages, for families who want to see a GP without weeks of delay, for parents who want the best for their children, for businesses that want to see a customs union and youth mobility scheme to fix our broken relationship with Europe. And finally, Presiding Officer, people are tired of political spin and the constant division. They want competence, compassion and care. That is what the Liberal Democrats stand for. Thousands of seemingly tiny acts of public service up and down this country, working to make our communities better, to fix what's broken, to build anew, to protect Liberal values at home and abroad. And that is how we restore hope in our communities and our trust in our politics, by fighting for change with fairness at its heart. Scotland deserves better, and the Liberal Democrats are ready to deliver that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. We now move to the open debate, the backbench speeches of up to 6 minutes. I call George Adam to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I'm glad to be back. I'm positive for the future for Scotland, and I'm positive about how we can make things better. And it's good to hear from the First Minister when he tells us his positive ideals of how we can make Scotland better, even with the challenges we have to deal with. But the other side of that, and for politics to be better, we need to get something better from the opposition, because the opposition, both Tory and Labour,
are extremely negative about absolutely everything. There's no idea of what they're going to do. I think Anna Starwar's gone from change because within a year of Labour government there was no change, it just got worse, to his new one seems to be a new direction. Well, all I can say is it seems they've got no direction whatsoever with regards to, because you never hear one thing of what they're going to do and what they're going to try and achieve. And that's what the people want to hear. The public want to know what you're doing as government, how you're achieving things. They don't want to listen to the spin from Labour and the spin from Tory. They want to hear real issues and real ideas coming to fruition. The First Minister was quite right to remind us, as we came into this session, we were going through the end game with COVID and how difficult that was. Even when we came into this chamber, we were all still a metre apart from one another. This chamber, for the first year, did not operate the way it should have. So to anyone to say to just brush off the idea of coming out of COVID is complete and utter nonsense, because that is a challenge for any government and one that everywhere else in the world is dealing with as well. And he mentioned Ukraine and Gaza and the genocide that's happening in Gaza. And see, for those that say that the Scottish Parliament should not talk about what's going on in Gaza, I say to them, take a long, hard look at yourself and what kind of person are you when you can see what is happening over in that country and you do not want to talk about that when you've got an opportunity as a politician to talk about that. You need to take a look at yourself to actually move on. Scotland has a voice. Scotland has a role in the world, and that's what we in the SNP are all about. The First Minister was quite right. What's happened over the summer period about the demonisation of some in the communities is absolutely disgraceful and needs to be called out. We've seen this before in history when those in the right actually attack minority groups. They've done it before. It's a game plan that they use all the time. That should be called out at every single occasion. And that brings me to the fact that as we move forward in this year towards the election, Presiding Officer, it's no surprise that I come from Paisley, but myself and my fellow buddies speak in a pretty plain and straight manner. There's no airs and graces, and I'll give you a story that's connected to the way we think and do things. Is the fact I remember a while ago I was doing the Paisley 10K and I was walking through, at this stage, through Fergusley Park. And a woman in her garden articulated her point of view to me about the fact that I wasn't running and I should run a bit faster. She motivated me. I can't use the language, Presiding Officer, that she used because parliamentary protocol wouldn't allow me, but she motivated to move forward because we don't dress it up in Paisley. We tell it how it is. We always look for the solutions to the challenges and problems. If a wain is hungry, you feed it. If the house is cold, you heat it. If something's broken, you fix it. It's the way our town and our people in my area have been thinking all their days. And I can't be anyone that doesn't think that way or work that way. There are difficulties, there are challenges, but you've got to find a way to make that solution, and that's what makes you relevant when you're speaking to the public. You know, looking at the job in hand and getting on with that job. Now, compare all this to Westminster. When people say we need help, Westminster doesn't find a solution or try to solve the issue. They don't find ways to help feed, heat or fix. They point, they shout, and they hope nobody notices the mess they've left and made. They blame each other, they blame others, they blame those that can't defend themselves, the easy target, like a typical bully. What we see at the moment is action here in Scotland and distraction in Westminster. That's the fundamental difference. I'm not interested in playing Westminster's type of game, but I'm interested in what delivers for the people of Paisley and Scotland. That's what's important to me and should be important to every single person in this chamber. And for me, the major difference is our SNP Scottish Government is focused on the four big things: ending child poverty, growing the economy, investing in public services and tackling the climate emergency. They're not slogans, they're not soundbites, it's actual hard work done by our hard-working Scottish Government and done for actual people. Take child poverty. Over 326,000 children supported through Scottish child payment. That's more money into families' pockets. Meanwhile, Westminster still clinging to their cruel two-child cap, a policy so daft their own backbenchers can't even back it. Scotland's government has actually given £1 billion so far to families that need it, whereas Westminster offers nothing but austerity. Scotland is bucking the trend while the UK is stuck in reverse gear.
makes you wonder what the actual point of the UK is. Our economy in Scotland's outperformed the UK again. We're top for inward investment outside London. We've tripled green jobs since 2021. And while we're building an economy for the future, Westminster's running an economic circus. Presiding officer, when it comes to the problem with climate, Westminster is actually still can't decide if climate change is a real thing or just another culture war to fight on GB News. I can't be bothered with that nonsense. So the choice is simple. You stick with Westminster or you look to the future and build a future with an independent Scotland where the Scottish people make the decisions for Scotland.
Thank you. Just to advise the Chamber, we are well over time. At this stage, I am going to keep members to their time limits. I call Rachel Hamilton to be followed by Claire Hockey. Up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The topic today before us is Scotland's priorities, and I'm sure we'll all contest exactly what they are. Each party will put forward its own interpretation of the issues that deserve the most attention, but in truth, the priorities of most Scots have not changed in the 18 years since the SNP came to power. The things that mattered most to people then still matter the most to them now. And the overwhelming majority of the public do not care about fringe obsessions like gender. They don't see independence as a big issue that needs action. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Christine Graham, briefly.
I'm sure the member would agree with me. One of the great achievements, not just of the SNP but of this Parliament, was the Borders Railway celebrating 10 years on Saturday. So there have been things delivering for the people of Scotland.
Rachel Hamilton.
I very much look forward to joining Christine Graham next week to celebrate the 10th anniversary. I've always been a supporter. So people don't sit at home and discuss small-time things like pardons for witches, unless, of course, they're saying can you believe that Holyrood actually spoke about these such things? What people want, as Russell Finlay said, is basic common sense. That's what they wanted in 2007, and it's what they need now, Presiding Officer, because in 18 years of SNP rule, they haven't got it. They did or didn't, not sure, didn't get it under Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon or Humza Yousaf. And they're not getting it under John Swinney either, the man who has been sitting around the cabinet table for all of one of those 18 years. John Swinney, who was the right-hand man for almost all of his predecessors' time in office, and who represents very much more of the same, Presiding Officer, the same SNP pretendy way that has let Scotland down for decades. And he won't do anything about Scotland's top priorities because he never has. If he does finally want to change course and do things differently, as he's been promising today, then Scotland's top priority, just like it was in 2008, is a thriving and growing economy, because we know that a prosperous economy is the key to increasing the tax revenues and providing more investment for the much-needed improvement in public services. Without higher economic growth, we'll never have the funds to reduce the NHS waiting list that I was intervening on the First Minister earlier about, or investing in more teachers and sorting out the attainment gap that others have been intervening on earlier. It's a crucial bedrock on which everything else is built. But under the SNP, it's way down the list of their priorities. On the Nationalist Watch, businesses don't feel that they have a say in what happens. Barely any companies think that the government understands their business. Companies are regularly disadvantaged compared to their competitors south of the border, especially when the SNP refused to pass on hundreds of millions of pounds of business rate relief provided by the UK government. For a few years, the SNP even brought down into government a party that doesn't believe in economic growth, who sees it as a bad thing. And it was the First Minister who infamously helped to negotiate that deal to bring the extreme Greens into government. The Greens might be gone, Presiding Officer, but their influence remains, and the SNP have been pursuing the same disastrous approach for years now. Higher taxes, more regulation, taking more of people's hard-earned money and providing less in return, limiting innovation and curtailing opportunities. I'll take the intervention.
Fergus Ewing, briefly.
Does Rachel Hamilton agree that the windfall tax must be either abolished or substantially reduced? Otherwise, we will see that industry die before our very eyes.
Rachel Hamilton.
very grateful to Fergus Ewing for the intervention, because I know that he is a huge advocate for North East oil and gas sector, as are the Scottish Conservatives. We know that if we do not give the extraction licences, get the oil and gas out of the ground, that it will be more unaffordable for people who have less in their pockets to spend, and their household bills are going up, their energy bills are going up. It's a very important issue to support the North East oil and gas sector. But things need to change, and they need to change fast, Presiding Officer. The SNP must do things differently, put our economy at the top of the agenda, and that's why my party will call for, and where we will stand in the months ahead, for a renewed focus on effective spending, for innovators to be encouraged to start and to grow businesses, for more high-quality jobs to be brought to Scotland. On the point that Fergus Ewing makes, for those thousands of jobs in the North East to be protected so that they can transition as we move to that net zero target. But they have the skills and they have the experience and the knowledge. We want less red tape for businesses. It's not us saying that, it's the businesses that are saying that. We don't want people wasting their time filling out paperwork. For the expansion of opportunities to ambitious and aspirational Scots, that the SNP are not meeting their expectations right now, for lower bills, as I've just mentioned, so families can decide how to spend more of their own money. And by putting our economy first, there'll be more revenue to give to the education system and to increase our rankings in the International League. I don't have much more time, do I, Presiding Officer? So I'll bring it to a close. But to summarise, our economy, our education system, our NHS cannot tolerate any more of this failing SNP government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I now call Claire Hockey to be followed by Pam Duncan-Glancy, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, too many households are still struggling with the cost of food, energy bills and everyday essentials. Decisions taken at Westminster continue to make life more difficult for families, communities and businesses across the country. They've faced years of austerity, a hard Brexit that has been imposed in Scotland, and completely and utterly catastrophic economic mismanagement by successive UK governments. No doubt my colleagues on the right in the Chamber will again try to distance themselves from the billions of pounds of cuts made by their UK Labour colleagues. But let me set the scene by giving a quick rundown of just some of their greatest hits. From refusing to end the two-child benefit cap, pushing more children into poverty, blocking compensation for WASPy women, slashing international aid, trying to introduce billions of pounds worth of cuts to disabled people, and imposing a tax on jobs and public services by hiking employer national insurance contributions. The pockets of the young, the poor, the disabled and the elderly have been raided under Labour. And speculation is mounting that the Chancellor is set to announce another wave of tax rises and spending cuts. We're only just into September and I'm already hearing from constituents who are worried about yet another rise in energy bills. These are the same constituents who had Labour leaflets pushed through their door promising their bills would go down by £300. Now, I'm going to expand on one of these points today, child poverty. And, Presiding Officer, the persistence of child poverty is testament to how families across the UK and Scotland as a whole have been absolutely failed by Westminster. It should be a mark of shame on the Labour government that child poverty is rising in the rest of the UK and expected to hit record highs by the end of this Westminster Parliament session. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the First Minister has said that the eradication of child poverty is his single most important objective, and the Scottish Government is taking action and turning the tide. Organisations such as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have highlighted SNP policies like the Scottish Child Payment and the mitigation of the two-child limit as ones which see Scotland bucking the trend. And research led by Professor Ruth Patrick shows that the Labour Westminster Government could cut child poverty in the UK by a sixth if they were to match Scotland's investment in social security. That represents 700,000 children lifted out of poverty overnight. You've got to ask the question, what's stopping them? The progress that Scotland has made on driving poverty rates down shows another way is possible if the political will is there. Last week I visited Rutherglen and Cambuslang Food Bank in my constituency to meet the new manager and to learn more about their upcoming move.
And with that visit and today's debate in mind, I was very interested to read a report the Trussell Trust commissioned from the Fraser of Allender Institute on the Scottish Child Payment. The Trussell Trust have also praised the payment as an example of how an important lever for reducing the need for food banks by lifting families out of deep poverty that leads to their youth. This report found evidence that the Scottish Child Payment successfully reduced food bank usage for single adult households with children, households with 3 or more children, and those with children aged 5 to 16. And while this research was exploratory in nature, the results are very promising and give us reason for optimism for when larger data sets are available. We're talking here about breaking cycles of deep poverty, allowing families not just to pay for essential items and live with more dignity and freedom, but to participate in more opportunities and to thrive. In South Lanarkshire, where my Rutherglen constituency is based, over 20,000 children and young people are actively benefiting from the Scottish Child Payment. Over 21,500 received Best Start grant and Best Start food payments. These are families in our communities who are getting money directly in their pockets, easing their household pressures. This is what tackling child poverty head-on looks like. And while Labour continues to sit in its hands at Westminster, refusing to reverse the cruel two-child cap, widely recognised as one of the biggest drivers of child poverty, the SNP has taken action to effectively scrap the cruel policy in Scotland from next March. With the powers available to us via this Parliament, the SNP government is taking action to keep more money in people's pockets through these tough times. And whether we're talking about social security support only available in Scotland, the expansion of free school meals, funded childcare worth £6,000 per year, free prescriptions and eye appointments, free tuition fees, free bus travel for 2.3 million people, or scrapping peak rail fares, this is making a difference to families across the country. This SNP government are saving people money, and the UK government is doing nothing to help people in our communities with soaring bills. This is a story of action versus distraction, and the SNP have chosen action, demonstrating what happens when decisions for Scotland can be and are made in Scotland. Presiding Officer, as an independent nation, we could do so much more, and that's what the SNP is fighting for. And through our actions and our vision over the next year, we will show that independence is the fresh start that Scotland needs.
Thank you. And I call Pam Duncan-Glancy to be followed by Jackie Demar. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to debate Scotland's priorities today. Eradicating child poverty, confronting the climate emergency, growing a stronger economy and sustaining high-quality public services are ambitions shared across this chamber. But the real test is not whether these aims are worthy, but whether they are being delivered. The sad reality is, Presiding Officer, they are not, and the people of Scotland know it. The SNP has had nearly 2 decades to lift children out of poverty, yet persistent child poverty is up. They've had 2 decades to confront the climate emergency, but they've missed their climate targets. They've had 2 decades to grow the economy, but they've overseen huge skills gaps needed to do that. And they've had 2 decades to sustain high-quality public services, yet the NHS waiting lists are leaving people in agony for years, teachers are leaving the profession, pupils are being failed, and colleges are on their knees. This government had £5.2 billion in additional funding this year, yet people's lives are not getting better. We're in the midst of a housing emergency, felt keenly in Glasgow. NHS waiting lists have created a 2-tier system, with those who can afford to pay having to go private. And the SNP have wasted billions of pounds of public money through incompetence and bureaucracy and stood by while school standards have declined. And, Presiding Officer, it's in education where we can see the potential of Scotland. It is in schools and our education system where we change life chances, celebrate achievement and deliver opportunity for all. But sadly in Scotland, it is also where we see the impact of a catastrophic failure of our government distracted and failing to open opportunity for all of Scotland's young people. The work our teachers, lecturers and support staff do from the early years through to lifelong learning, additional support in apprenticeships, in universities and in colleges can transform lives, reduce poverty and deliver the Scotland we all want. And the message from them, from families, from young people and staff is simple. Get the basics right and give us a fighting chance and we can and will flourish. But this government have failed to do that. If the government are to deliver what they say in their motion today are their priorities, these must be matched by real outcomes in classrooms, campuses and workplaces across Scotland. Presiding Officer, ministers came to office saying education was their #1 priority. Yet thousands of young people are being held back as the poverty-related attainment gap persists, with data showing the gap between our most and least deprived pupils remains stark, around 20 percentage points in primary. And you're still less likely to get a National 5 or an advanced higher if you come from a poorer background. This government is failing pupils in our poorest communities. Some primary ones starting in recent weeks are already behind before they have even found their peg. And attendance is too low, because whilst the government have tinkered around the edges to address it, the reality is they have failed to tackle the fundamentals that lock young people out of school. The fact that classroom violence is rising because pupils and staff do not feel supported or backed. The support, the scaffolding around them has been broken. Long waits for CAMs, no pathways to support for neurodiversity, and teacher workloads is seeing teachers leave the profession. And despite what the government tell us, teacher numbers are nowhere near what they should be in key subjects and localities, leaving children short of opportunities. All the while, many teachers are out of work. Support staff are stretched to breaking point, and whilst inclusion is promised, support is rationed. Colleges, which should be our regional engines of opportunity, are being asked to do more with less, while employers warn of a skills gap that hold growth back and the mission to meet the transition to net zero. With enrolments falling, funding squeezed and capital budgets cut in real terms, I say to the First Minister and his team, Scotland cannot close its skills gaps by shrinking the institutions that train our workforce or our young people. This is not focus. This is drift, managed, or as some have said, unmanaged decline. Devolution gives real powers over schools, skills, colleges, universities, childcare and much more. But the government have failed to grasp the opportunity it brings. But Scots see through it. They need leadership, a government that shares their ambitions and that works relentlessly to deliver the services that they deserve. Put simply, we need a government back in the service of the people of Scotland again. And, Presiding Officer, at the election in May, people in Scotland can have that with Scottish Labour and a new direction. A government focused on investing in our future by ensuring that every child in every community can believe that success belongs to them. A government that does more than a motion. A government with ambition for all of our young people, with a plan from cradle to career to match it and deliver it. A plan that builds strong skills in literacy, oracy and numeracy. A plan that delivers a knowledge-rich curricula, world-leading digital and STEM capability, creativity, and a skills system that delivers for young people, career changers and employers, with colleges, universities and educators at its heart. Ambition for school staff that sees action to reduce teacher workloads and that properly matches jobs with newly qualified teachers. A government with ambition for safe and thriving schools, with solid action on behaviour and attendance and proper support for pupils with ASN. Scotland's young people need a government with ambition for families and action to remove barriers and deliver affordable childcare that works for working families. Ambition and action in all of those areas is how we deliver opportunity for young people, and those are the priorities of Scotland's people, and they will be the priorities of a Scottish Labour government. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Jackie Dunbar to be followed by Craig Hoy. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. After a long recess away from Parliament, it's good to be back talking about our priorities and about what matters to my constituents and to the folk across Scotland. The Scottish Government has 4 key priorities: eradicating child poverty, tackling the climate emergency, growing the economy and sustaining public services. And in Aberdeen, you can see how those 4 priorities are interlinked and are combining to provide one single clear direction for the future of our city and our country. So let me talk them through in turn. The value of giving every child the best start in life and eradicating child poverty is something that you would think would be clear for everyone to see. You would think. Because if you truly want to protect children, then you start by protecting them from poverty. But instead, we have a Labour government that is still persevering with a 2-child cap that is forcing thousands of our bairns to go to bed at night hungry. Thank goodness that in Scotland we will take a different path, and this government will abolish the 2-child cap. And with that, alongside the baby box, the Scottish Child Payment, Best Start grants, 1,140 hours of childcare a year, and a continued investment in our nurseries and schools, we are ensuring that every child gets the best start in life. The second priority is about the climate emergency, and some may say that's the world that these young folk will inherit. But in Aberdeen, Europe's energy capital, the future net zero capital of the world, the journey to net zero has already started, and it is already impacting on folks' lives. Many young folk have a parent who work in the energy industry, and when they grow up, if those jobs aren't there, then there's a big question mark about what jobs there will be. The third priority is growing the economy, and for Aberdeen, as I've already alluded to, the energy sector is our biggest economy. Thousands of folk in our city work for energy companies. Thousands more work in the supply chain, and the money they spend supports a high proportion of other local jobs. For decades, the fortunes of Aberdeen have risen and fallen with oil prices, and throughout that time, we have looked at what a future without oil and gas might look like, because whether it's phased out, forced out, or it runs out, there will come a point in time when Aberdeen no longer has an oil and gas industry. But being home to a workforce that is so highly skilled does offer us a golden opportunity to establish ourselves as a net zero capital. I'll take a quick intervention, but time is very tight.
Very grateful. The SNP's draft energy strategy maintains its presumption against new oil and gas. Does the member support that presumption?
Jackie Dunbar.
I am talking about the offshore, the energy industry in Aberdeen, and you've gone off topic just slightly. The climate crisis and the efforts to tackle it will affect everyone, but with the right investment and support, Aberdeen will lead Scotland and the world in the move to net zero. As I'm standing here just now, over 30,000 industry professionals and our own Deputy First Minister are attending the Offshore Europe Conference in my Aberdeen Donside constituency. The focus of that event is the future of the energy industry, and it is a priority for all of us, especially those of us in the North East. Presiding Officer, the motion talks about being hampered by the policy decisions of the UK Government. The North East and the energy industry is probably the clearest example of where they are getting it wrong. Far too quick to announce a windfall tax only for energy companies. Far too quick to increase it. Far too quick to remove investment incentives, while it has taken far too long to back and invest in the Acorn project. I suspect we'll be waiting a very long time to see any meaningful amount of jobs created within GB Energy. And the UK Government has utterly failed to take any meaningful action to save energy jobs in Scotland, be that across the North East or at Grangemouth. The Scottish Government has stepped up, not just with the £500 million Just Transition Fund, but also with a range of local investments, such as the millions they have committed to Aberdeen's first Green Academy building in Hazelhead, which conveniently ties in with all of the Scottish Government's priorities. But moving on to our fourth and final priority of delivering and sustaining good quality public services. I grew up with the idea that a welfare state would support me from the cradle to grave. While that's been eroded by 15 years of austerity, it is still worth fighting for, and I'm pleased that the Scottish Government is delivering in that same spirit. From baby boxes and best starts to funeral support payments and everything in between. From free university, free doctor appointments and a helping hand when folk have their own children. So those are the Scottish Government's priorities, and I can see the difference it makes to people's lives as they work towards and deliver on those priorities every day. In contrast, I'm not so sure what the UK Government's priorities are, and I'm unsure if Keir Starmer does either. But I can see what the UK has delivered for people: a proliferation of food banks, record levels of inequality, reduced opportunities, Brexit, attempts to sow division, and 2 decades of wage stagnation. I'm looking forward to folk getting the choice between a Scottish Government that is focused on delivering for them and a broken Britain that looks to be in its dying days. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Craig Hoy to be followed by Sarah Boyack. Up to 6 minutes. Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This debate serves to show one thing and one thing only, namely that despite the opportunity for self-reflection and a reset over the summer, the First Minister and his government have learnt no lessons at all. Because we return to Parliament today and the SNP's first act, sadly and predictably, is to press for independence. But over the summer I've spoken to residents on doorsteps and in surgeries from Aberlady to Sanquhar. And let me tell the First Minister, who's just left the chamber, this. Independence was not a priority for a single person out there in the real world that I spoke to. But now we know that between now and the election, we will be locked in this downward and depressing spiral of constitutional debate, because this is a distraction by a discredited First Minister who has not offered one single effective solution to the problems that his government has created and which are getting worse by the day. Mr Swinney's priority, I'm afraid to say, and he isn't here, but I will repeat it if he gets back in, I'm afraid is now a dwindling band of nationalist diehards who grow shriller and shriller as each month passes. But let's offer a reality check to Mr Swinney and to his colleagues, because we do so because the real priorities of the people out in the country are very different to those of his government. Rather than obsessing on gender issues, people would like his government to fix the NHS. 1 in 6 Scots are still languishing on an NHS waiting list, stretching primary care to breaking point. People also want more money, more of their own money in their own pocket. Instead, taxes are sky high, with hard-pressed Scots being bled dry with £1.7 billion in additional income taxes that are resulting in behavioural change and damaging the Scottish economy. And driving on Scotland's roads, particularly our rural roads, areas forgotten about by the SNP, are now increasingly like driving on the surface of the moon. And worse still, the failure to upgrade key roads such as the A75 is putting lives and livelihoods at risk. And what of Ivan McKee's commitment to public sector reform, which is apparently a priority, and right on cue Mr McKee arrives in the chamber. He said when he announced his public sector reform plan earlier this year that it was rooted in realism. He said it was not done, and I quote, in a headline-grabbing way that simply throws out random targets based on no evidence. Yet we now know from an FOI request that Mr McKee's policy is a sham. Civil servants warned him that there are significant caveats, and I quote, limitations on the figures underpinning the very challenging target he set. These included, they went on, inconsistencies in how public bodies had self-reported their previous spending activity, compounded by a light-touch verification system. And his own Directorate for Public Service Reform warned him of this in May when it said there is not a specific breakdown of the £1 billion target, and there is an element of risk in this approach. And we also found out that in May the Cabinet Secretaries raised what they said were considerable concerns with the Minister, but today Shona Robertson could shed no light on what those specific concerns were. So, in short, I'm short on time on this occasion, so I won't. So, in short, well, I will briefly.
Ivan McKee, Minister.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just to let them know, yeah, of course there's risk, but we're going to deliver on it, right? Yes, there are challenges, but we are going to deliver on it. And yes, the number is rooted in reality, because it's based on the data we collected, and it's 20% of that number. That's what we're going to deliver on. So you might want to sit there and stand there and say that we've got problems and challenges. It's not going to happen. But I'll let him know we're committed to it. We are going to deliver on it, and everybody's committed to making that happen.
Craig Hoy.
Mr knows only too well that it's not rooted in reality. It's written on the back of a fag packet to get him through the next Scottish parliamentary election. And if his own officials and his own colleagues don't believe there is a plan, then why should the country have any faith in his proposals? And isn't the truth of the matter that facing a £5 billion budget black hole created by SNP ministers by 2030, the government is now clutching at straws to get themselves through next year's election? And isn't the reality is that to pay for their bloated public sector and welfare bill, ministers will have to make very, very tough decisions. And while they won't tell you this now, this means huge tax increases or massive public spending cuts if the SNP is re-elected next May. Deputy Presiding Officer, over the course of the summer, I knocked on thousands of doors across Dumfriesshire. And let me tell the First Minister and the Scottish Government this. People who care little for the south of Scotland, nor for regions that do not vote for the SNP, Let me tell them what the Scottish people's real priorities are: tackling long waits in our NHS, fixing our roads and providing certainty to farmers who are scared witless by Labour's family farm tax. And I say to the First Minister and the Government and the SNP backbenchers, on immigration, they could not be further away from the views of real people, the ordinary Scots that I spoke to over the summer. Many of the local people that I spoke to live with the reality of an asylum hotel, the Mercure in Dumfries, on their doorstep. It's not, as it is for the First Minister, an abstract matter to them. It's what they live with day to day. It has changed the character of their community, and not for the better. And we need a government that focuses on the needs of communities like those in Dumfriesshire and not allowing more and more people into our country in breach of the law. Britain, Deputy Presiding Officer, is our home, not a hotel for those trying to enter this country illegally. But sadly, for this SNP government, this First Minister and this self-indulgent Parliament, they will simply not understand that.
I now call Sarah Boyack to be followed by Ben McPherson. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, can I draw members' attention to my register of interest re my former employment? I want to focus today on the missed opportunities and how the SNP is letting down people in my area. As ever, we heard the blame today, even though our new Labour government allocated that government an extra £5.2 billion in Barnett consequentials. That's real money that should be making a real difference to people's lives, but it is not being delivered where it's needed because of the SNP's waste of money. And we've pushed them so hard to focus on the day job. We saw it with the iPavilion, where after huge public pressure, they were forced into a U-turn. We saw it again with peak fares, where once more they had to U-turn after pressure by Labour MSPs. But our constituents, remember the debates, colleagues, it's on the official report, our constituents deserve better than government by U-turn. They deserve government by delivery, whether it's our NHS, with massive waiting times for 900,000 people, or in my constituency, the lack of access to CAM services, which is massively impacting on young people, and the failure to deliver an educational attainment cited by Pam Duncan-Glancy. And I thought that Mark Griffin's response to today's housing statement was spot on. While we welcome more investment, it is too little, too late, because we're still in a housing emergency with a lack of affordable, accessible housing. It's unacceptable that over 9,000 children will still be in unsuitable accommodation. And I thought it was really significant today that the Cabinet Secretary did not directly answer Ben McPherson's question about Edinburgh's housing emergency. Our constituents desperately need to see more support for our councils, our housing associations, housing co-ops to build the affordable, accessible housing we desperately need. And we're not seeing... Yes, I'll take a brief intervention.
Briefly, Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sarah Boyack, with Mariah McCallum not in the chamber, I think it's important to put on the record that the Cabinet Secretary did actually respond, saying that there would be targeted spending in areas of high pressure like Edinburgh.
Sarah Boyack.
Yes, but we didn't get the targets. We didn't get the accountability because for years we've had a lack of building in Edinburgh that means people are leaving the city and going to East Lothian, Mid Lothian, West Lothian because they simply can't afford housing in the city, and the lack of affordable housing, it means that rents have been rocketing and are simply unaffordable. So we need that urgent action, and we did not get the commitments, the detailed financial commitments we needed today. And it's deeply disappointing. I want to focus on the climate emergency because those targets were dumped because the SNP had not done the heavy lifting to meet them. And the climate emergency is not abstract. It's impacting on people's lives now. Flooding is disrupting rail services, damaging people's homes and communities. And last week, a damning report from Audit Scotland warned that the Scottish Government is failing to allocate the investment needed to make our communities safe from flooding. Over the last decade, costs have trebled, and local authorities now need clarity and certainty on funding, because the risk of flooding is increasing because of extreme weather. Coastal communities are vulnerable, as are homes in floodplains and beside rivers. There are 280,000 homes in Scotland currently at risk. And then there's the growing risk of wildfires. It's horrific what's happening across Europe, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal. but we're also seeing wildfires here in Scotland. This summer, we had a fire that burned for several days in Uphall in West Lothian. Last month, we had a serious fire in Holyrood Park that lasted for days. It's thought that the fire was the result of human activity, so yes, we need to raise awareness of risk, but awareness alone is not enough. People also need to know that their emergency services will be there for them when disaster strikes, and that's why we need the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service properly resourced to deal with the new risks of fires and flooding. Rural and urban communities need more community capacity, not cuts, because the time it takes firefighters to arrive can make the difference between life and death. So it makes no sense to close Marianville Fire Station, just over a mile from this Parliament, an area where there's 3,500 new homes. Major developments at Leith Ports, where Marianville is the station responsible for tackling fires in the Holyrood Park. Closing Marianville would leave families and businesses more exposed to risk. It makes no sense to close that station, but it's another example of SNP government cuts not delivering the services our constituents urgently need. We need a government focused on delivery, not wasting their money through bad decision making, whether it's the failed National Stair Service, which wasted millions but created not a single job, the lack of job created in Scotland on ferries, buses or renewables. If we're going to see a fair transition, we need good quality jobs in Scotland now. There was such an irony in John Swinney saying his government doesn't have the powers they need, given the massive missed opportunities with our renewables in Scotland, the opportunities for creating more jobs in our communities, for community, cooperative or municipally owned heat and power companies. We need to see the recommendations from the Just Transition Commission acted on. We need action in the North East. We need action in our ports and harbours, because the SNP promised to create 130,000 green jobs hasn't happened. A publicly owned energy system they didn't create, but we can see GB Energy getting on with the job. Investment in community energy projects. We cannot afford another SNP government of excuses and U-turns. We need a government of delivery, a government that will only come with a Scottish Labour government. Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to the final speaker in the open debate. I call Ben McPherson. Up to 6 minutes, Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. After a long recess, coming into Parliament today, it was even more striking to me, and I'm sure it was to other colleagues, just what a privilege it is to come and be able to speak and express ourselves in this place on behalf of those we serve. They expect us to bring solutions and positive vision, especially at a time, as the First Minister said, when we're 25 years into this Parliament's history, a quarter of the way into the 21st century, and in a period of multiple challenges at home and across the world. And therefore, I'm actually, honestly, dismayed and shocked at just the absolute lack of depth of solutions from the opposition benches. When I listened to both opposition leaders speak, I didn't hear one idea, one worked out policy, one thing that was constructive. These are tough times that the people we represent are experiencing. We all know that. And they expect us to do what we're sent here to do, which is come up with ways that make a difference for them. And that's exactly what the First Minister set out to Parliament and what the Scottish Government is focused on. Because yes, there are challenges, but there are multiple successes to be welcoming of too. I didn't hear any opposition MSP raise the really good results that our school pupils achieved across the country, or the fact that more people from less privileged backgrounds are going to university. I didn't hear them say that we had a remarkable summer of culture and festivities, particularly here in the capital, where people poured in from around the world and spoke positively about our country thereafter. I didn't hear any praise for our remarkable police force and the fact that they managed all of those events and a presidential visit and a vice presidential visit extremely well. I didn't hear any comment about the fact that waiting times The standard has been met for the third time in a row, as was announced today. I didn't hear that NHS Scotland have a 5-year high for operations, the record number of hip and knee replacements performed by our NHS. There is more to do, as the First Minister said, but there is much achieved. And we need to get to a position with all the challenge in our country where people can look to this place and see people speaking with passion about ideas to make things better and being constructive about what has been done well. Because those who are just trying to talk our country down and chip our society away, they'll be absolutely delighted in what the opposition parties have put to Parliament today, because it's empty. No ideas. Anna Sauer, you may shake your head when you get on your feet shortly. Or, pardon me, Presiding Officer, if Anna Sauer gets on his feet later this week, come out with some constructive solutions. Yeah. And also, when the opposition parties speak, they talk as if Scotland already has all the powers of an independent nation. They talk as if there wasn't a Conservative government that made disastrous decisions for many, many years. They talk as if there wasn't a coalition between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives that put the worst austerity in this country and Europe in the 21st century. They talk as if the Labour government's done everything perfectly over the years, and we all know that that's not the case. Because there is so much more that we can do, but we need to do it together and be honest. Because take the NHS. You know, the opposition make criticism, but think about what we could do if we had a migration policy in Scotland, or if we hadn't been taken out of the EU against our will, and how things would be better. When it comes to the economy, imagine if we could reverse or didn't have that NI increase, or we could do more with VAT to support the hospitality sector, or we could do more with other aspects of the taxation system. That would help us make a difference. That's why the Constitution matters. Think about energy. It was talked about earlier about redirecting renewable wealth into communities. Energy policy is reserved. So, that's why the Constitution matters and more powers matters. It talked about poverty alleviation. Imagine if we didn't have to mitigate against the two-child cap and spend money on that, and mitigate against the bedroom tax and spend money on that. Imagine if we could make all of the welfare policy here in Scotland in a more sensible and thoughtful way to reduce poverty even further. And of course, we're making good progress compared with elsewhere in the UK, as has already been said. There's so much more that could be said of why the Constitution matters. And as much as the opposition and others want to chip away and tear things down, I can feel there's a resistant optimism developing in Scotland. And I'm proud that this SNP government is part of the pushback against the negativity. And yes, we will talk about hope. Yes, we will talk about how we make things better. And yes, we will talk about the Constitution being relevant in that space. More and more people are seeing independence as the space where Scotland would be able to achieve its full potential. It is becoming the settled will more and more. And those who dismiss it as an aspiration, those who dismiss statehood, you need to remember that you're talking about 50% of the people that we represent. Their opinions matter. And the question very soon will be, what are the opposition and Westminster going to do to facilitate their will?
We now come to closing speeches. I call first Jamie Green up to 6 minutes. Mr Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I first of all welcome the presence of Ruth Maguire back to the Chamber after her absence. It's good to see her here. And also, can I take the opportunity to thank the constituent who wrote to me congratulating me on taking over the Green Party. I'm very grateful for your email, but I think I've done enough bench moving this year. Listening to the First Minister today, I was really struck by a sense of déjà vu, because I've listened to this debate some 9 years in a row. But the big difference this year in the First Minister's speech, that it took him 14 minutes to utter the word independence, and even then it was just once, which I think in itself is quite telling of the direction of travel of the SNP. But here's what we did not hear. Here's what we did not hear but should have heard from the speakers from the governing party today. We didn't hear from them, but we did from opposition, that for the 7th year in a row, Scotland has the highest number of drug deaths in Europe. We didn't hear that 25 of them were in Inverclyde alone. These people are my neighbours. These people are my friends of friends. We didn't hear from the government benches about the 8,000 cancellations on the Gurk to Dunoon ferry in this last 2 years. We didn't hear about Ferguson Marine, the fact it was overlooked for ferry contracts to yards in Poland and Turkey, which we are now seeing delays to as well. We didn't hear about the 2,000 people, 2,000, that's more than the entire population of Holyrood in my region, who are stuck in a hospital bed due to delayed discharge. They're in hospital, but they should be at home, and we all know it. Of course, none of this comes as any surprise to me, because we all know that care homes are closing right across Scotland, left, right and centre. 10,000 people are waiting for a social care assessment in Scotland right now. We didn't hear from the government benches about the nearly 1 million people stuck on an outpatient, inpatient or diagnostic appointment waiting list. Some for years. Years of worry, years of pain and years of distress. Presiding Officer, some people will die waiting. We didn't hear about the psychiatric patients discharged from hospital, often at their most vulnerable point in life, who waited a year for critical follow-up care. One example, in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, waited 330 days to be seen after leaving hospital. Yes, all that might sound a bit parochial, and yes, all that might sound overly negative, but all politics is local, and that is the reality of too many people and too many of our constituents. Because, believe it or not, very few people in my region lie awake at night wondering about the many constitutional arguments which occupy so much airtime in this chamber. They lie awake at night because they're in pain. They lie awake at night because they're waiting on a new knee or hip. They lie awake at night because they're stuck in temporary accommodation, wondering why on earth they cannot find a permanent home for them and their children. They lie awake at night in the back streets of our Glasgow city, addicted to drugs and desperate for help, and many of them will not wake the next day. That is our national shame. It's not just a national shame on this government, it's a national shame on this entire Parliament. They lie awake at night staring at their spreadsheets, wondering why footfall to their island is down this year. They wonder if their business will survive another winter, and they wonder which member staff they might have to lay off to balance the books. Now, Ben McPherson said he wants solutions. I agree, actually. I want to hear constructive solutions from all parties. All parties have good ideas. But people are fed up, and I don't blame them. But here's my biggest fear, and here's why I do find genuine consensus in some of the comments that have been made this afternoon. My biggest fear is that voters will respond to their overall loss of faith in politics and politicians by finding solace in the fringes of populist politics, in politicians who will promise them the earth but deliver nothing but grievance, division and community discontent. Because divide and conquer, as their strategy seems to be, will deliver temporary electoral results, but it also risks fracturing the good nature of Scots. And I think that is something that we cannot let happen as a Parliament. Because I haven't got much time, apologies. Because let me say, refugees are not the reason you cannot get a GP appointment on that 8 AM queue. Let me say the LGBT community is not the reason that domestic violence is on the up in Scotland. There are other reasons. And it's about time we stop scapegoating people who already have faced so much adversity in life to get to where they are. And I make no apologies for saying that. Look, I understand governing is difficult. It's about priorities. I understand there's never been an endless pot of cash. I understand the economic difficulties of being in government and having to make those decisions. But taxpayers do want and deserve value for money. They expect good public services. They expect their Parliament to debate these issues with gravity and sensitivity. They expect their politicians to work constructively when it's required, but also disagree respectfully when it is necessary. Of course they want alternatives. Of course they're sick of people bemoaning failures. It is something that is sorely lacking in this place, and that is also government taking and accepting responsibility when they have to. Now, this debate is entitled Scotland's Future. We all want a better future for Scotland, I don't doubt it. But speeches will not deliver a better Scotland. A government that does what it promises will. And And whatever the next government of Scotland looks like, it should never forget that. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Ross Greer up to 6 minutes. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Excuse me. I want to start off picking up where Ben McPherson finished, because I was disappointed in this debate. It was an opportunity for all parties to set out our priorities and our visions for Scotland. Now, I do think that the Scottish Government in too many cases lacks ambition and bravery, but there is clearly a vision there, one that I can broadly agree with. But what we heard from Labour and the Conservatives this afternoon was a relentlessly negative vision for this country, if vision is even a word that can be used to describe it. If I wasn't convinced beforehand, I'm absolutely convinced now that it is the strategy of both of these parties to simply make people miserable, because they think that is the best way to achieve the results that they want next May. But there's no sense that they would improve the lives of the people of this country. And more importantly, there was no record for them to speak of. This is a minority Scottish Government. A minority government gives every member of this Parliament the opportunity to exercise influence and to deliver on what they believe in. But there was no mention of a record of delivery and achievement from the Labour or Conservative benches, because they have a strategy of preventing progress, more so in this Parliament than they even did in the last one. I can think of no better example of that, Presiding Officer, than on the housing bill, where I brought an amendment to end one particular scandal, the scandal of domestic abuse survivors being forced to pay off their abusers' council tax debts. And I want to thank Shirley-Ann Somerville and Paul McClellan for supporting me with that amendment, and for the SNP members who voted for it. But Labour and Conservative MSPs voted against that amendment. An amendment to end the scandal of abuse survivors paying their abusers' debts. Why? And then in June, we had the contrived reasons that they came up with to oppose the education bill and keep the SQA in place, an organisation that they, like me, have quite rightly railed against for years. But I did, Presiding Officer, try to find something that I could agree with. Russell Finlay at one point complained about an unreformed public sector, and while I probably have very different visions of reform to him, I can agree on the need for reform. I'm sure on that basis, then, that if the report into the pilots of the 4-day working week comes back showing a boost in worker productivity at no additional cost, then we will see that in the Conservative manifesto for next year. But I don't really believe that, of course, because that would be a policy that would make some people happier. And that is something the Conservatives absolutely cannot see in Scotland. And I would ask my Conservative colleagues, are you not exhausted by this negativity? Are you not exhausted coming here every day to talk down the country that you live in and represent? I said in my opening speech about the need for us to redistribute wealth to deliver the kind of fairer, greener society that I believe the vast majority of people want. And that involves having some difficult conversations, like the one that I had with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance this morning about the small business bonus scheme. I accept the need for us to support small businesses, the lifeblood of Scotland's economy, but the Government's own independent review found that this £250 million scheme had no evidence of positive economic outcomes. So if we are to spend £250 million supporting small businesses every year, I think we need to have a difficult conversation about whether the SBBS in its current form is the way to do that. And it's not the only area of tax where we need to see reform. I think we need to see reform in property taxes. There are too many young people who want to start a family and need a home to do that, but are locked out because of a broken housing market. Well, the King, one of the richest people in this country, is personally exempt from paying land and buildings transaction tax. I know there are many on the Government benches who agree with the policies that the Greens have put forward, and under the leadership of myself and Gillian Mackay, we want to work constructively with the Government where there is common ground and the opportunity to take this country forward together. Because people want and need politicians on their side, fighting for them. Free bus travel for young people, removing peak rail fares. These were policies that put money in people's pockets, took action to tackle the climate crisis and made life easier for normal people. And it is that kind of progress that's key to securing independence. We need to strain the existing powers of this place, show people the good of self-government. I think it undermines the argument for independence when our existing, limited but existing powers sit unused or underused. Yes, we are doing this with one hand tied behind our back, but we need to play the hand that we've been dealt. And we need to act to fix the everyday problems that people face. Because happy people make for an optimistic society, and I think that is the only way that we will achieve our goal of independence. I want us to strain the limits of devolution. One area where I hope the Scottish Government stretches the limits of devolution tomorrow is in opposing apartheid Israel's genocidal assault on Palestine. I wrote to the First Minister with a package of measures that the Government could deliver within its existing powers to deliver the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, a campaign that worked against apartheid South Africa and can work against apartheid Israel. Because the Scottish Government's actions in regards to the genocide in Gaza simply do not match their welcome words. In fact, they've taken no actions against the State of Israel. Compare that to Russia, where as soon as Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Scottish Government urged every business, quite rightly, urged every business in this country to axe all ties, all business links with Russia. Palestinian Scots want to see action from this Government because words won't save their family members' lives. If the Scottish Government is willing to be bold, Green MSPs will work with them, because a bold, brave government is exactly what this era of crisis requires.
Thank you. I now call Michael Mann. Again, up to 6 minutes. Mr Mann.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government's motion today invites us to consider Scotland's priorities. And if the SNP ever cared about the priorities of ordinary people, it's clear they have long since lost touch with them. Instead of a functioning NHS, they've brought the health service to its knees. We have more patients waiting over 2 years for treatment in NHS Tayside than we do in the whole of England. The whole of England. Instead of a school system where young people can reach their potential, they presided over decline in school standards, and in Dundee they can't even build the primary school they promised 10 years ago. Instead of a thriving economy, they have left us lagging behind other parts of the UK and wasted billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. If the SNP and John Swinney had real ideas about how to fix the mess that they have made, we would have seen them by now. But of course none of this is what John Swinney and the SNP want to talk about. They know their legislative achievements are meagre and their record in government is one of demonstrable failure. Instead, John Swinney is reaching for the independence panic button, not about building out, but about narrowing in. These are not the priorities of ordinary people across Scotland who are working ever harder and getting ever less in return from their government. John Swinney does know this, and in the next 8 months, unfortunately, he will put the SNP election strategy before the good of the country. Because the First Minister began the debate today by talking about blame. A preferable term might be responsibility, Presiding Officer, and the opportunity to finally take some. He says a corner is being turned. Well, I would ask the First Minister, who is the corner being turned on? Because the person who set us on this path, who set this direction, is him. 20 years, 2 decades. And I tell you honestly, our NHS will not survive another decade of this knackered SNP government. Yes.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Mara for giving way. And he misconstrues my comments, and he does it in a very dangerous way that I want to hold him to account for. Because I willingly accept my responsibility. I'm here answering questions as First Minister every Thursday when Parliament sits to accept my responsibility. The point on blame I was making was the blame that's been foisted on migrants in this country, and half of it has been landed on them by the Labour government in London.
Michael Mara.
President, I think that's a risible statement. It's below the First Minister. He is absolutely right that there is a climate of fear being nurtured in this country by people on the extreme right. I have to say to him that he has to take, when he talks about his legislative agenda, he has to take responsibility for the record that he produces that can result in people being disenfranchised and scared in their own communities when they don't see a government that is delivering for them. That is part of the responsibility of government, to make sure you build the compact between the politicians and the people. No, thank you, sir. So it's absolutely right that he does take responsibility for that record, because he's completely out of touch on the NHS, Presiding Officer, completely out of touch. 900,000 people on waiting lists in Scotland. Cancer deaths on the rise. Private health care opening up in streets across Scotland. And people are having to empty their bank accounts and go into debt to obtain the care that they so badly need. That's the record that he is so desperate to walk away from. Because that record does have very real consequences, as pointed out by various members today. Today saw the publication of annual drugs deaths figures for Scotland. In 2024, 1,017 people in Scotland lost their lives to addiction and drugs, the worst record in the whole of Europe. 1,017 lives destroyed, 1,017 families ripped apart, 1,017 people left behind for grieving loved ones. For years, this scandal has torn through my home city of Dundee, and yet again, Dundee is in the top 3 areas in Scotland for drug deaths. In 2010, 22 Dundonians were lost to suspected drug deaths, but by 2021 that figure was 52, at which point Nicola Sturgeon admitted that she had taken her eye off the ball. At least some semblance of responsibility. Unfortunately, it deserves 3 paragraphs in our latest tax-avoiding novel. So, tragically, lives are being lost that could well have been saved if Scotland had had a government with its eyes on the ball and its people's interests at its heart. The SNP are content to take Scotland further down the path of managed decline and failure. Scottish Labour knows that that is not good enough. Scots deserve a health service is there when they need it, a place to call home, good jobs, a world-class education system. We used to have these things, but nearly 2 decades of the SNP has hollowed out those services and hobbled our economy. Scotland can't afford a third decade of the SNP. Scottish Labour is ambitious for this country's future. We'll build a country where government delivers the basics, but that everyone has the chance to reach their full potential. We'll fix the NHS, clear the backlogs and end the ATM rush for a GP appointment. We'll improve our schools, we'll support our high streets and grow our economy. We'll end the addiction to waste and respect taxpayers' money. A Scottish Labour government will focus on ordinary people's priorities and deliver the real new direction that Scotland so desperately needs.
Thank you. And I call Murdo Fraser up to 7 minutes. Mr Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Now, normally at this stage in the parliamentary timetable, we debate the programme for government. Of course, we did that back in May, but it's a good opportunity this afternoon to look at the proposals from the Scottish Government and what we hear from the First Minister, what that tells us about this Government's priorities for the period ahead. And if everybody wanted to see an illustration of what's wrong with the priorities of this Government, is the fact that we look at the parliamentary timetable for this week and we see the entirety of parliamentary business tomorrow being spent on business that has nothing to do with this Parliament, looking at international affairs. A great opportunity, I'm sure, for people on the SNP bench and elsewhere to grandstand, but a literal waste of parliamentary time. And George Adams said Scotland should have a voice on these issues. He's right. Scotland does have a voice on these issues. We send 56 MPs to Westminster to speak for Scotland on these matters, and I'm sure Mr Adams knows some of them are SNP MPs and utterly useless and incapable of doing their job properly, Presiding Officer. We should be spending our time here productively on the things we can change, not wasting our time on the things we can't. Now, Presiding Officer, we heard from Mr Swinney, as we would expect, about independence. I was just a little bit surprised that in his comments on independence he didn't address the latest revelations from the Scottish Government's own GERS figures that came out just a few weeks ago in recess. Because the net fiscal deficit for Scotland is now up to £26.5 billion, 11.7% of GDP, double the UK level. And that means an independent Scotland would have to find £13 billion worth of either cuts or tax rises. And they never tell us, Presiding Officer, how they would fill that gap. And that figure means that the union dividend is now worth £2,600 extra for every man, woman and child in Scotland, in fiscal transfers from other parts of the United Kingdom. And you might think, with all that extra money to spend on the health service, on education, on infrastructure, on justice, we would have public services so much better than every other part of the United Kingdom, and patently that is not the case, as we've heard in this afternoon's debate. And the other figure we got from the GERS figures is that we now know that the public sector spend in Scotland is equivalent to 52% of gross domestic product. 52%, amongst the highest of any country in the developed world. And when the SNP talk about austerity, are they trying to tell us that more than half of our GDP in the public sector is austerity? And if that's austerity, what figure would they have Would it be 62%? Would it be 72%? They never tell us. They have huge sums of money at their disposal and they need to stop wasting them, Presiding Officer. Now, I welcome the First Minister saying there needs to be a focus on economic growth, and we agree. We've just had the figures for the second quarter of this year. GDP growth in Scotland was 0.2%. In the UK, under a dismal Labour Chancellor holding back economic growth, the equivalent figure is 0.3%. So Scotland is growing at just two-thirds the rate, even of the dismal performance of the United Kingdom. And if we look at the long-term trend, since 2011, if the Scottish economy had grown at the same rate as the UK, it would be £10 billion bigger than it is today. That is the SNP's record in government, Presiding Officer. And when they look at these figures, they say, oh, but go back to 2007. And yes, it's right. If you look at the figure, 2007 to 2011, we had rapid growth in the Scottish economy. Why? Because of growth in the oil and gas sector. The very oil and gas sector they want to close down, Presiding Officer. And Kemi Badenoch's absolutely right in what she had to say today in Aberdeen, talking about how we need to take the brakes off in terms of extraction from the North Sea. And that economic underperformance comes at a cost. The Scottish Fiscal Commission talk about the economic performance gap, estimated in 2005-2006 at £1.058 billion to the public sector, £1 billion less than we should have in revenues, thanks to SNP mismanagement. But as Craig Hoy reminded us, we have Ivan McKee riding to the rescue. And we all hope Mr McKee is successful in his battle with his cabinet colleagues who are apparently very resistant. They, according to information released under Freedom of Information, have, and I quote, raised considerable concern about Mr McKee's plans. Well, keep fighting, Mr McKee. We're all behind you to find these savings in the public sector. Now, Presiding Officer, Ben McPherson challenged us to come up with some positive ideas. So I will do just that for Mr McPherson's benefit. We make no apology for demanding a focus on growth, because growth provides wealth. Growth provides more secure, better paid jobs. Growth provides less poverty. Growth provides more disposable income. Growth provides higher tax revenues. What we should be doing is tackling the barriers to growth. The higher taxes imposed by the SNP on income tax and LBTT, the business rates hammering hospitality, the visitor levy. Now, throughout the summer, I heard so many businesses expressing their concern about a visitor levy coming in on top of all the other bills they have to pay. The excessive regulation, such as the over-bureaucratic short-term let rules or the creaking planning system that needs to be fixed. Presiding Officer, there are other priorities we have to see tackled. We have an NHS with too many people waiting too long. And Anna Sarber was right to talk about the number of people in Scotland having to pay for private operations because they're simply waiting too long. I met a constituent at the weekend in exactly that position, waiting more than a year for a vital hip replacement, eventually having to dip into savings to go private, and it's happening too often. We have standards in schools dropping below our competitor nations, a growing issues of violence in the classroom and a failure to deliver vital infrastructure. And remember, this is all with £2,600 more per head of population to spend than the rest of the UK. We should have public services so much better than everywhere else with all that money, and that is SNP failure, Presiding Officer. So our approach in closing is simply this. Let's put growth first. Let's take the brakes of oil and gas extraction in the North Sea. Let's get reformed, effective public services. Let's invest in infrastructure. Let's speak up for the victims of crime. Those are the people's priorities, and there are priorities too.
Thank you. I now call on Shona Robertson to wind up the debate. Cabinet Secretary, up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I just say, first of all, at the start, that I think Murdo Fraser is so out of touch with the Scottish people who care deeply about the plight of people in Gaza, and they expect their nation's parliament to care too. And I think the compassion that the people of Scotland have is in stark contrast to the lack of compassion on the Tory benches that we've heard today. can I welcome everyone back to what is a more plural Parliament, presiding officer, than we had when we left it in June. Can I also welcome Ruth Maguire back to the Chamber? It's good to see her here. Can I start with Russell Finlay's miserable contribution, probably reflecting the rather miserable summer he and his colleagues have had, I suspect. Russell Finlay's narrative is really not working for him, it's not working for his party. It's entirely negative, as others have pointed out. It is based around the simple objective of talking down Scotland. It is all they have, and it will continue to be roundly rejected by the population of our nation. Anis Sarwar, despite the hubris, it can't escape the simple truth that Anis Sarwar failed to support more funding for the NHS. He failed to support more funding to tackle child poverty. He failed to support more funding for housing to tackle the housing emergency. So it's all talk and no action from Anis Sarwar as usual. And, you know, if Anis Sarwar wants to talk about what's knackered, he only has to look at his knackered Prime Minister and his knackered UK Labour government after 1 year in power. 1 year in power, plummeting in the polls and running scared of reform. So if he wants to use the word knackered from his focus groups, we are very happy to talk about what's knackered, and it is his government and his Prime Minister. In contrast, Ross Greer made a very constructive contribution, and I would agree with many of the things that he had to say. We disagree on some things, but it is about working collaboratively on the things that we agree on. And I would also say that about Alex Cole-Hamilton, because there are many areas where Alex Cole-Hamilton and his colleagues have taken a pragmatic approach to, for example, working with us on the budget to progress on areas where we agree, and I welcome that. I would just point out on the point he made about the attainment gap, however, that we have record levels of literacy and numeracy attainment for both primary and secondary pupils, and we have record low attainment gap in literacy for primary schools. So yes, more to do, but I think we have to recognise where progress has been made. I think Claire Hawkey very well set out the woeful record of the UK Labour government, with a promise of cuts to energy bills only for them to rise, and of course impacting very much on people's household budgets. Pam Duncan-Glancy talked about reducing child poverty, but let me remind her of the facts. Scotland is the only part of the UK where child poverty is falling. It's going up in the areas that the Labour Party control, whether it's Wales or in England. So the reality is very different from Pam Duncan-Glancy's rhetoric. Briefly.
Liam Kerr.
Very grateful. This debate has been on the Scottish Government's priorities, but not one SNP speaker has mentioned the serious challenges in the justice portfolio. Can the people of Scotland therefore conclude that justice is still not a priority for this failing SNP government?
Cabinet Secretary.
We have prioritised justice, and we have prioritised the frontline spend for the Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, both having a real terms increase in their funding, and we see crime in most areas at a record low. And that is a record that we should be proud of. People should feel safe in Scotland. That's not to say there are not challenges with sexual offences and domestic violence, something I take very seriously indeed. But let's not create this idea that Scotland is not a safe place. It is a safe place to live in, and we should all be telling the truth about that. I cannot let this debate pass, presiding officer, without challenging something that Craig Hoy said. Now, I was going to do a bit of a light-hearted thing about public sector reform and the explanation in detail that I gave him at the Finance Committee this morning, but I want to turn to something that Craig Hoy said. He said the character of Dumfries has changed and is changing. And I want to know what he means by character. What characteristics is Craig Hoy referring to?
Craig Hoy.
Happily to respond to the Minister, because I spent this summer out talking to real voters and the real world, and they are very, very concerned about the community effects of long-term asylum hotels at the heart of their community. People should not be staying there for 2 to 3 years. That is not a long-term solution, and it is for the Scottish Government and the UK Government now to answer how they intend to solve this problem.
Cabinet Secretary.
Craig Hoy is going to talk about changed characteristics. He needs to explain what characteristics he is talking about, because that is the dangerous rhetoric that brings what we don't want to this place, and it has to stop now. And Craig Hoy should think and reflect upon his statement today. Sarah Boyack talked about action on climate. And I agree that we need action on climate and the transition. But here we are again with the lack of reality where the UK Labour Government has a chance to act. So on Grangemouth, still without the cash that the UK Labour Government promised. Yet they've managed to save a second steelworks in England, meanwhile. Unite the Union have called the Labour Government out for the lack of action and the lack of cash that was promised. So let's get away from the rhetoric and let's stump up the cash that your government promised the workers of Grangemouth. Ben McPherson spoke for us all today by exposing the lack of ideas from any of the opposition benches. He made up for that in recognition of the positive achievements of our public services across the summer months. Hard work by our hard-working public servants, and we should not talk down their efforts. It really demeans those who do. And Jamie Green talked about some of the issues that we need to address. And of course, he referred to drug deaths. And I am a representative of an area that has been very much impacted by drug deaths. And I absolutely have the desire to work with others across this chamber, and the organisations are working day in, day out in our communities. And of course we have provided record levels of funding for drugs and alcohol programmes, but without doubt there is more that we need to do, and I absolutely accept that. Can I just make sure Michael Mara is aware that the Western Gateway School in Dundee is actually in the capital plan for Dundee City Council. I thought he would have known that, but there we are. Every day is a learning day, even for Michael Mara. So in conclusion, presiding officer, can I say that the First Minister in his opening speech laid out in detail the impact of the resources we are putting in and the improvements that are being made in our public services. At no point did he say there wasn't more to do. Of course there is. The actions that we've mentioned cover only a few of the important areas where we'll continue to invest in budgets that were not supported by the opposition parties and deliver positive impacts. We recognise there's more to do. We'll continue to listen, understand the issues that people are facing, and we'll continue to deliver on the people's priorities for the future of Scotland, and that's what we'll focus on.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on priorities for Scotland. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of 4 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move motions 18690 and 18691 on committee membership, and 18692 and 18693 on committee substitutes.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time, and there are 6 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Russell Finlay is agreed to, the amendments in the name of Anna Sarwar and Alex Cole-Hamilton will fall. The first question is that Amendment 18671.4 in the name of Russell Finlay, which seeks to amend Motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. Thank you. I will remind members that if the amendment in the name of Russell Finlay is agreed to, the amendments in the name of Anna Sarwar and Alex Cole-Hamilton will fall. The question is that Amendment 18671.4 in the name of Russell Finlay, which seeks to amend Motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland, be agreed. And members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Neil Gray for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app did not connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Gray. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Richard Lockhead for a point of order.
My app wouldn't work. I'd have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Lockhead. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 18671.4 in the name of Russell Finlay is yes 27, no 90. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Anna Sarwar is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Alex Cole-Hamilton will fall. The next question is that amendment 18671.2 in the name of Anna Sarwar, which seeks to amend motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shirley-Anne Somerville for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Somerville. We'll ensure that that is recorded. I call Neil Gray for a point of order.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. My app didn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Gray. We'll ensure that's recorded. And I call Neil Bibby for a point of order.
I would have voted yes, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. We'll ensure that is recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 18671.2 in the name of Anna Sarwar is yes 19, no 98. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 18671.3 in the name of Ross Greer, which seeks to amend motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. Point of order, Carol Mockin.
Sorry, my app seemed to do something funny. I do apologise. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Mockin. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 18671.3 in the name of Ross Greer is yes 8, no 111. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 18671.1 in the name of Alex Cole-Hamilton, which seeks to amend motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 18671.1 in the name of Alex Cole-Hamilton is yes 50, no 68. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And the next question is that motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney on priorities for Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. Therefore, we'll move to a vote, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. Call Marie Goujon for a point of order.
My app wouldn't connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Goujon. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on motion 18671 in the name of John Swinney is yes 66, no 52. There was one abstention. The motion is therefore agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on 4 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, the final question is that motions 18690 and 18691 on committee membership, 18692 and 18693 on committee substitutes, in the name of Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motions are therefore agreed. And that concludes decision time, and we'll now move on to members' business in the name of Alec Rowley.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.